Chapter 1376. She was tolerant of herself and was never strict with herself, but was strict with others. She was extremely indulgent with herself, but was extremely harsh with others. She was not grateful to her hard-working parents, but would cry when she saw a stray dog. She dared to monitor the morals of the world on the internet, but would not dare to fart when she saw a thief on the street. She cursed you with her filthy words every day, but if you replied to her, you would be bullying her, as if you had just been raped. Ning Shu only wanted to say, "Fuck you." Ning Shu ignored Mina, who was swearing to the heavens and the earth. Mina's words were worse than farts, even farts had a smell. Seeing that Ning Shu was ignoring her, Mina picked up her suitcase and went out. The suitcase was filled with blood hunter tools. Looking at her impulsive appearance, was she going to look for Fei Rui? Ha ha ha, a rabbit entering the tiger's den. She did not know her own worth and ran off to hunt vampires. Did Mina really have such a thing as a brain? A brain was a good thing. Well, silly girls have good lives. Ning Shu suddenly felt that he was not used to it. In his previous world, he met a calm and collected person, but in this world, he suddenly met a person like Mina. She did not use her brain when she went out, this difference was hard to get used to. Ning Shu was too lazy to care if Mina went to look for Fei Rui, Mina would not die anyway. As for whether Mina knew where Fei Rui was, she would meet him anyway. After Mina left, Ning Shu sat cross-legged on the bed, his fingers flying as he set up a spirit-gathering array. The spiritual energy was too thin, so with a spirit-gathering array, he could gather the spiritual energy around him. This way, his cultivation speed would be faster. Ning Shu cultivated diligently, and when he opened his eyes, it was already the next morning. The spirit-gathering array had already collapsed. Ning Shu stopped cultivating, took out his phone, and sent a message to Mina, saying that he was going back to the organization. The mission this time was completed, and he could not let anything happen because of Mina. Ning Shu did not wait for Mina to come back, and directly took the suitcase from the bed and left. Then, he bought a hamburger and got in the car. Even if Mina did all kinds of things, she would still be alive and kicking. She looked cute, but no matter what she did, she would not die. In fact, Mina had a disease called the immortal disease. Fei Rui teased her, but if Mina was really in danger, Fei Rui would definitely save her. The Blood Hunter organization had a manor in the west. There were large areas of vegetables and fruit trees in the manor. It looks like a farm. When Ning Shu returned to the Vampire Hunter Guild, he wrote a report about his mission. He emphasized that Mina might be involved with vampires and hoped that the organization would pay attention to it. He also said that the vampire was very strong and wasn't afraid of holy water. He also had a cloak. In short, only high nobles and blood breeds would have a cloak. The cloak was like a magical artifact that could protect vampires. Ning Shu handed in the report. In any case, he had successfully tipped them off. Before the two of them had actually broken through, she had already complained. It was taboo for vampire hunters to have any connections with vampires. What if they were tempted by the vampires and turned against the organization? After all, vampires had too many things: wealth, power, immortality. Any one of them would be enough to make people betray him. In the plot, Mina was sentenced to death by the organization. It was because Mina's situation was more serious and she had an interracial relationship with a vampire. Actually, love was beautiful, but their identities were really awkward. One was a vampire and the other was a blood hunter. It was related to the blood breeds and the blood hunters. The human organization against the vampires disappeared just like that. No one could do anything to the vampires anymore. Being a blood hunter was a job. If you did well, you would get a salary and a bonus. It wasn't like what Fei Rui said, where it was for the sake of righteousness. Although there was a purpose, even if it was filled with the stench of money, that person still had to live, eat, drink, and defecate. Besides, didn't vampires drink human blood too? It was all for the sake of energy. No one should say that the other was evil, and no one should look down on the other. Ning Shu went to turn in the mission, and there was an extra sum of money in his card. In other words, this mission was considered completed. Ning Shu returned to his room. There were 2 beds in the room. This was his and Mina's room. Ning Shu sat on the bed and tidied up the things in the box. He cleaned all the guns and crossbows. Ning Shu directly soaked the crossbows' arrowheads in holy water. This way, they would be more lethal against ordinary vampires. Not every blood breeds had the ability to teleport like Fei Rui. Ning Shu cleaned the guns and loaded them, making sure that they wouldn't run out of bullets when needed. He checked the tools in his box and placed them under the bed. Then, he sat cross-legged on the bed and began to cultivate. This manor was located in a relatively remote area, and the spiritual energy was more abundant than in places with more people. Setting up a spirit gathering array was simply half the work. Ning Shu absorbed the spiritual energy around him. His previously emptied dantian slowly recovered, and the spiritual energy was more abundant than before. Ning Shu was excited. The stronger he was, the better. This way, he would have a higher chance of winning against Fei Rui. In fact, Ning Shu had always had a question in his heart. The existence of the blood hunters was like a fishbone in the throat for the blood breeds, and gave humans the confidence to negotiate with the blood breeds. Both parties had signed a contract. Logically speaking, these blood hunters should be very powerful. How could they be eliminated by Fei Rui? Even if the blood breeds that he brought were all very powerful, if the blood hunters were really so weak and were eliminated by the blood breeds, why would the blood breeds keep them until now? Was there something wrong with the blood hunters that allowed the blood breeds to take advantage of the situation? The plot only described how Fei Rui was like a god descending, saving Mina and eliminating the blood hunters. Forcefully turning him into ashes, it was really cool and at ease. It seemed like he was here for Mina. The person who entrusted him, Molly, wasn't a high-ranking member of the blood hunters, so she didn't know. She only thought that Fei Rui was here to save Mina. Eliminating the blood hunters and killing her. Ning Shu couldn't figure it out. The only thing he could do now was to speed up his cultivation. When he was hungry, he went to the cafeteria to eat. This manor was self-sufficient. They grew fruits and vegetables, and there was even a chef. Ning Shu drank milk and ate a hamburger. Ning Shu wasn't used to eating foreign food. He always felt like he couldn't fill his stomach with rice. If he didn't eat properly, it didn't feel like eating. Someone sat across from Ning Shu. When he looked up, it was his male colleague, Tulu. Tulu was wearing a leather jacket and jeans. He looked like a cowboy. "Why are you alone? Where's Mina?" Tulu dipped his sandwich in ketchup and drank some buckwheat wine. Ning Shu said half-heartedly, "She has something to do. She'll be back in a while." Tulu nodded. "I remember that you're type O, right?" Ning Shu nodded. "Yes, I'm type O. Since your partner isn't with you, and you're type O, I received a mission. There's a blood vampire causing trouble in Molo's town. He's already killed a lot of girls," Tulu said. Ning Shu swallowed the hamburger in his mouth and asked, "Where's your partner?" Chapter 1377. Most of the time, they worked together as partners since they were familiar with each other. Working with an unfamiliar blood hunter could lead to mistakes. That was why Ning Shu asked Tulu about his partner. Usually, a new partner would be found only if his partner died. Tulu shrugged. "You know Casey. That's his only hobby. I don't know who he's sleeping with right now." Ning Shu rolled his eyes. Casey was a famous prostitute among the blood hunters. Every time a mission was over, he would go to the brothel to have some fun. Being a blood hunter was like walking on a knife's edge. Most of the money they earned was spent on being the children of wealth. Ning Shu drank a mouthful of milk and asked, why type O blood? Don't tell me that the vampire drinks human blood with type O blood. You're right. According to the information they gave me, all the girls who died were type O, Tulu said. Also, the guy is very cunning. We couldn't catch him at all. Even the police died. Ning Shu almost choked. I'm going to be the bait. Tulu nodded. But don't worry. Casey and I will keep you safe. We'll split the reward between the three of us, Tulu said. Ning Shu wanted to go, but he didn't want to. If he went, he wouldn't be able to practice cultivation. She had an even more powerful enemy, Fei Rui, the vampire prince. If he went, he could learn more about the vampires. He was lucky enough to escape from Fei Rui last time. He needed to know how powerful the other vampires were. Seeing Ning Shu's hesitation, Tulu said, don't worry. We'll get a lot of money. If we go with an ordinary girl, she'll be scared out of her wits. We still need a blood hunter. Ning Shu nodded and agreed to go. Ning Shu approached Tulu and asked, there's something I want to ask you. What is it? Tulu took a sip of milk. I've always been curious about how we got the holy water. Tulu didn't even think about it. The church gave it to us. Where did the church come from? Ning Shu asked. Yeah, God gave it to me, Tulu replied. You believe in God? Ning Shu couldn't help but ask. Tulu shrugged. Why not? Even vampires exist. Cain, the first vampire, is God's brother. Ning Shu was speechless. Ning Shu didn't really believe in God, and holy water was more like water that was filled with energy. This water wasn't harmful to ordinary people, but it was targeted at vampires. If vampires had innate skills, then would humans also have magicians and witches? What if the holy water was a spell cast by a magician? Ning Shu was a blood hunter who couldn't get any lower. She had no access to the affairs of the upper echelons. Ning Shu finished his burger and drank his milk. I'm going back to clean up. Ning Shu followed them to do the quest because he wanted to find the yellow paper and cinnabar. Since the talisman was effective, the cinnabar and yellow paper should also be useful. But this was not the East, and these things were very rare. Vampires are afraid of sunlight, crosses and garlic. But with energy, they can be destroyed. Okay, I'll wait for you at the gate. Ning Shu returned to his room and found Mina inside. She looked travel-worn, and her suitcase was by her feet. She seemed to have come back in a hurry. When Mina saw Ning Shu, she stood up and said, why didn't you tell me you were back? Ning Shu pulled out the suitcase from under the bed and said, I already told you. I texted you. It's just a text. Why didn't you wait for me to come back? Mina was played by that bastard vampire. He suddenly threw her into the air and spun her around. Mina was so scared that she couldn't stop screaming. When she fell to the ground, she began to vomit. Mina wanted to kill Fei Rui with her gun, but he just stood there. But Fei Rui just stood there and let her shoot. Mina closed her eyes and shot Fei Rui in the shoulder. Before Fei Rui could do anything, Mina dropped the gun in fear and asked, are you okay? Mina was so scared that she was about to cry. She had never killed a vampire before, so she didn't have a good understanding of them. After all, who would think that a vampire who looked like a human and was more delicate than a human would be so cruel and scary? Now that she had shot Fei Rui, Mina felt very guilty and asked him what happened. Vampires had strong healing abilities. Even if they were hit, they could recover. Fei Rui was completely fine. But Mina seemed to have lost the skills and calmness of a blood hunter. She also forgot about the healing abilities of vampires. He looked like he was about to cry. Fei Rui was stunned, but he told Mina that he was fine. Mina was so angry that she turned around and left. When she returned to the convenience hotel with her suitcase, she found that Ning Shu had already left and even checked out. Mina carried her suitcase and rushed back to the organization. On the way back, Fei Rui still followed Mina. Even if Mina chased him away, he wouldn't leave. Fei Rui half-joked and half-seriously said that he would give Mina the embrace. Mina swore to the heavens that she was a blood hunter. How could she become a vampire and become Fei Rui's prey? For vampires, the embrace was a declaration of ownership of their prey, and other vampires couldn't touch them. Mina didn't want to be sucked dry by a damn vampire and then be forced to suck the blood of a vampire. The process of the embrace was bloody. Fei Rui's eyes shone. This blood hunter's blood was sweet and was a good plaything. It would be fun to have her by his side. Fei Rui followed Mina all the way back. He sent Mina to the entrance of the manor and then disappeared. Mina rushed back in a sorry state. When she saw Ning Shu, her expression was very bad. "We're partners. How can you leave without saying goodbye?" Ning Shu opened the box and checked the items. After making sure that there was nothing left behind, she closed the box and locked it with a snap of the button. "I already said that I sent you a message. I'm going back. You rushed to find the vampire and didn't even discuss it with me. Aren't we partners? The same thing would be wrong if it happened to someone else, but it wasn't wrong if it happened to Mina." Was she going to run behind Mina's butt? I was too angry. "Can't you forgive me just this once?" Mina mumbled. Ning Shu's expression didn't change. He changed into his marten boots and tied his shoelaces. "I was too angry. You didn't discuss anything with me and just did whatever you wanted. I was angry and left first. Can you forgive me?" Mina was speechless. The two couldn't be compared at all. She didn't have a single cent on her. Her money was all taken care of by Molly. When she returned to the hotel, she found that she had already checked out. She had nowhere to go and no money to go back to the organization. If it weren't for the vampire, she wouldn't have been able to come back. Chapter 1378. When Ning Shu saw Mina's expression, she knew what Mina was thinking. She was always asking others for help, but she didn't care about what she did. Was Mina, who grew up as a vampire hunter, really that kind? True kindness was to be strict with oneself and lenient with others. Mina was the opposite. Ning Shu tied his shoelaces and left with his suitcase. Mina saw that Ning Shu was about to leave and immediately asked, "Do you have a mission now?" "No, I'm teaming up with someone for a mission," Ning Shu said. Mina felt that Ning Shu's attitude towards her had changed, so she didn't dare to be stubborn. She immediately picked up her suitcase and followed behind Ning Shu. "Ning Shu, what are you doing?" Ning Shu stopped in his tracks. Mina said, "Don't you have a mission?" "I'm going with you. This mission has nothing to do with you. You should rest well." He couldn't imagine what it would be like for Mina to follow him. Ning Shu was afraid that Fei Rui would follow Mina wherever she went. They were going to deal with the vampire who killed people. If there was a vampire as strong as Fei Rui, they would probably be wiped out. As a vampire, Fei Rui wouldn't leave them in the lurch. It's still the same thing. Even if he made a mistake, it's our own education. Who allowed you to hit my child? Ning Shu didn't want to go against Fei Rui for now. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes and looked at Mina. Should he take this opportunity to get rid of Mina? Ning Shu immediately gave up on the idea. They were all vampire hunters, so they couldn't kill each other. Besides, there was no point in killing her. It was better to be dead than to be alive. If he wanted to kill someone, he should kill Fei Rui. Without Fei Rui, Mina would die of pain. Everything was because of men. He had to solve the problem from the root. Fei Rui would destroy the vampire hunters. Without the vampire hunters, the original owner would have nowhere to go. Everything he learned was to deal with vampires. Ning Shu directly and decisively rejected Mina. Mina's eyes widened in pain. Aren't we partners? They only invited me, not you, so you don't have to go. Even if you go, you won't have any money. Moreover, it would cause trouble. So, Jasmine, are you looking for a new partner? You don't want to be my partner anymore. Ning Shu knocked Mina out with a chop and shook his hand. Stop blabbering. Mina's eyes rolled back, and she fell to the ground. Ning Shu dragged Mina onto the bed, covered her with a blanket, closed the door, and left with the suitcase. Ning Shu had used a lot of force, so Mina would probably faint for a while. Moreover, Ning Shu really didn't want to see Mina like this. How could you be so bad? How could you give me such a hurtful look? It was full of blame. Ning Shu carried his luggage to the entrance of the manor. Tulu was leaning against a car, smoking a cigar. When Ning Shu entered the manor, Tulu put Ning Shu's suitcase in the trunk. Ning Shu got into the car and asked Tulu, "Aren't we waiting for Casey? Didn't they say they were going together? He's waiting for us at the next place." Tulu started the car. The western part of the manor was a desolate place. Other than the roads, there were only sand dunes. Ning Shu closed his eyes and began to cultivate. It was a cultivation method for a peerless martial art. The car arrived at a small town, and Tulu went straight to a bar. It was one of those rough bars in the western part of the country. A blonde man was flirting with a woman. He was quite handsome. When Ning Shu saw him, she knew that he was Casey. He attracted bees and butterflies everywhere, but never his heart. Everyone was willing, and no one wanted to build a long-term relationship. Kathy saw Ning Shu and immediately waved to her. "Over here." Ning Shu and Tulu walked over, and the bartender placed 2 glasses of wine in front of Ning Shu and Tulu. Ning Shu took a sip, but it tasted strange. Ning Shu put it down after a sip. Casey patted the buttocks of the woman in his arms. The woman kissed him and tactfully left. When the woman left, Kathy's perverted hands slapped her buttocks, and her plump buttocks bounced. Ning Shu's eyes were glued to the woman. The woman wasn't angry at all. She turned around and blew Casey a kiss. Tulu couldn't help but roll his eyes at Casey. Be careful not to die on a woman's belly. There was a limit to how lustful he could be, especially when it came to beautiful vampire women. Kathy's eyes were fixed, and her legs were weak. Casey took a sip of wine and said casually, "It's just for fun. Nothing's going to happen. Besides, I'll go somewhere else after I'm done. There's no danger." Ning Shu clicked his tongue. Casey was completely controlled by his lower body. However, vampire hunters basically couldn't settle down. They couldn't even guarantee how long they would live. Who knew when they would abandon their families? Many people were enjoying themselves while they had the wine today. After buying some jerky and water, they were ready to set off. As soon as they left the bar, the sky rumbled and a strong wind blew, accompanied by the sound of propellers. Ning Shu looked up and saw a helicopter. Ning Shu raised an eyebrow and asked Tulu, "Are we going to take a plane?" Tulu shook his head. "We don't have such good treatment. I don't even dare to think about taking a plane." Not many people from the Blood Hunter organization traveled by plane. Because there were a lot of houses around, the helicopter could only stop in midair. The door of the helicopter opened, and Ning Shu saw a man carrying a woman down a rope ladder. When the two of them landed, Ning Shu's eyes widened when she saw them. Wasn't that Fei Rui and Mina? Didn't she knock Mina out? She should have slept for at least 2 hours. Ning Shu raised her wrist and looked at her watch. It was already quite late. Mina carried a suitcase and walked over with Ning Shu and the others. "Molly, we're partners. We should be going on a mission together." Mina bit her lip and said. Ning Shu's body tensed up. He looked at Fei Rui warily. Sure enough, Fei Rui had actually sent Mina over. Had the two of them made any progress? Fei Rui flew Mina over. Please, they were going to deal with the troublesome vampire. What was the point of following a vampire? Tulu and Kashi looked at each other. They only called Molly, but Mina came with them. As colleagues, they knew Mina's professional skills. She was stronger than ordinary people, but it was lucky she didn't cause any trouble. No one wanted to be Mina's partner, so the organization let her and Molly become partners. Mina was cute, but in the face of life, being cute was useless. Vampire hunters walked on the edge of a knife. Tulu and Kathy sized up Fei Rui. Fei Rui's aura and exquisite face made Tulu and Kathy question his identity. Chapter 1379. Fei Rui's face was very pale, and he looked like a vampire. But if he really was a vampire, why didn't he kill Mina, who was a blood hunter? Ning Shu grabbed Mina's wrist and wanted to pull her aside to talk. He was really annoyed with Mina and Fei Rui. Ning Shu calculated in his heart. His energy center was more abundant this time, and he could even draw talismans in the air for a while. Ning Shu had just grabbed Mina's wrist when Fei Rui grabbed her hand. Fei Rui's hand was very cold, like a corpse without any warmth. And his grip was very strong, as if he wanted to crush her wrist bones. Mina's wrist was grabbed by Ning Shu, and Ning Shu's wrist was grabbed by Fei Rui. Ning Shu turned to look at Fei Rui, and Fei Rui's eyes flashed red. It was only for a moment, and no one noticed it. What? Ning Shu asked expressionlessly. Let go of Mina, Fei Rui said condescendingly. Ning Shu's hand was hurting from Fei Rui's grip, but her expression did not change. What's wrong with me saying a few words to my partner? What right do you have to interfere with my relationship with Mina? Don't forget your status. Why are you following Mina around? Ning Shu asked Fei Rui coldly. Now he was acting like a flower protector, and it really made people speechless. How could the relationship between people be so strange? Mina saw that Ning Shu's expression was unfriendly, and she was afraid that Ning Shu would say that Fei Rui was a vampire. And the organization didn't allow blood hunters and vampires to interact with each other. Let go of Molly first, I have something to talk to her about, Mina said to Fei Rui. Fei Rui was a little angry. Are you ordering me? But he still obediently let go of Ning Shu's wrist. Ning Shu looked at his wrist, and it was already turning blue. Damn. Ning Shu pulled Mina to the side and asked, do you know what our target is this time? It's a vampire who killed many girls. But now you have a vampire with you. Are you trying to kill all of us? Ning Shu was a little annoyed. Do you know where you stand? If you want to be with the noble and mysterious vampires, then don't do any missions. Mina opened her mouth and said in an aggrieved tone, Jasmine, you've changed. I only wanted to complete the mission with you. I don't know what to do now that you've abandoned me. I woke up to look for you. After I left the manor, it was Fei Rui who sent me here. He wouldn't leave even if I tried to chase him away. Ning Shu furrowed his brows. So he followed you and you couldn't chase him away. What are you feeling wronged for? What are you feeling wronged for? Ning Shu was speechless. Since Fei Rui is following you, you shouldn't go. This vampire is very powerful. Even the four of us are no match for him. We're going to kill his own kind. Do you think he won't do anything? If Fei Rui wasn't staring at them, Ning Shu would have knocked on Mina's head. Mina said, I told Fei Rui that we're going to kill vampires. He wants to go with me. He said that vampires have rules and can't kill humans. Fei Rui will personally kill vampires who break the rules. Maybe we can rely on Fei Rui to complete the mission. Ning Shu, the rules of the contract were only discussed when people were of the same status. None of the blood hunters present could defeat Fei Rui. Fei Rui would kill his own kind. Mi Na was so innocent and kind. Don't go on this mission. Ning Shu said indifferently. Also, Du Lu and Casey only invited me, not you. Don't follow us. Mi Na's eyes widened as she looked at Ning Shu. Jasmine, do you have to say such harsh words? Harsh words? Ning Shu said. I haven't said anything worse. Do you know the rules of the blood hunters? Your relationship with Fei Rui is very dangerous. You'll drag me down with you. If you want to die, fine. Why drag me down with you? What do I owe you? Mi Na took a deep breath and held back her tears. She picked up her suitcase and turned to leave. Mi Na walked to Fei Rui's side. Let's go back. They don't welcome us. Fei Rui smirked. I didn't agree with you killing vampires. It's dangerous. Fei Rui hugged Mi Na's waist and held on to the rope. The helicopter's propellers spun rapidly, and they slowly flew away. Casey was stunned. Ning Shu asked, what are you and Mi Na playing at? Ning Shu said indifferently, Mi Na is going to betray us. That man is a vampire. Ning Shu said the truth directly. The more people saw it, the more Mi Na's crime would be confirmed. Casey and Du Lu's expressions changed. Betrayal is a serious crime. And that vampire is a noble. He's Prince Fei Rui. Cold sweat appeared on Du Lu's forehead. A prince? Thank goodness he didn't do anything. If he's a prince, why did he treat me now like that? Casey asked. As a man, Casey could naturally sense the way the vampire looked at me now. It was the way a man looked at a woman. It was full of interest and interest. Otherwise, a man wouldn't do anything for a woman. Ning Shu said, Du Lu, Casey, go back and write a report. Explain what happened between Fei Rui and Mi Na. Fei Rui is a prince. He has a lot of power in the blood race. If he uses Mi Na to mobilize the blood hunters will be caught off guard. Casey and Du Lu looked at each other and nodded. After the mission is completed, we will write a report. After Mi Na left, Ning Shu and the other two got in the car and went to the town where the vampires were causing trouble. Because many girls had died, there were very few people in the town. Even during the day, there was basically no one. The shops were all closed. It looked like an empty town. Du Lu first went to the police station to understand the situation. Casey helped Ning Shu with the dress. Ning Shu was speechless. Why do I have to wear a dress? Trust me, a woman in a dress will attract more attention than a woman in pants. If you wear a dress, you can be sure you're a woman almost instantly. Since you're the bait, you have to be as conspicuous as possible. Ning Shu was speechless. Ning Shu resigned herself to her fate and put on the dress. Kathy then took a slightly curly blonde hair and put it on Ning Shu's head. Casey rubbed his chin and looked at Ning Shu. You're more feminine than before. Ning Shu said, don't covet my beauty. I don't do that. It's troublesome. Casey shrugged. Also, I have a feeling that if I really do something, I will be discounted by you. Ning Shu put on the high heels and nodded. Your feeling is right. I will break your third leg. When night fell, Ning Shu walked on the street coquettishly, waiting for the vampire to take the bait. Ning Shu's legs hurt from wearing high heels. She walked around for a while, but the vampire didn't come out. Did he know she was the bait? Chapter 1380. However, strolling on the street seemed strange. Knowing that there were vampires here, but still daring to stroll on the street, one could tell that there was a problem at first glance. Ning Shu walked to a corner, opened the door and entered the house. Then the lights turned on. Ning Shu sat on the sofa, drinking water while watching TV, waiting for the other party to come. But the other party still didn't come. Ning Shu wanted to release her spiritual force to check the surrounding situation. But vampires are very sensitive creatures. Last time, she only spied on Fei Rui a little, but Fei Rui found her. Suddenly, with a bang, the electricity in the house stopped. There was the sound of glass shattering, and Ning Shu saw a dark figure flying towards her. Since the electricity stopped, Ning Shu cast a spell and hit the vampire's body. The vampire screamed and fell to the ground. Fei Rui and Casey, who were hiding in the house, also rushed out. They used a crossbow smeared with holy water to shoot at the vampire. The vampire let out a blood-curdling scream. Tulu picked up a sharp wooden stake and stabbed it into the vampire's heart. The vampire hurriedly dodged, but Ning Shu pinched a seal and froze the vampire. The vampire's expression froze. It wanted to move its body but couldn't. The sharp wooden stake pierced the vampire's heart. Casey held a shovel in her hand. She used the shovel to cut off the vampire's head. Next, at dawn, the vampire's body was burned to ashes and let the ashes flutter in the wind. The ashes scattered in all directions. The immobilizing talisman consumed a lot of Ning Shu's spiritual force. Just 2 immobilizing talismans drained Ning Shu's spiritual force. Casey threw away the shovel in her hand and let out a long breath. It went smoothly. Another sum of money came into the account. Tulu dragged the dead vampire to the courtyard, intending to burn it at dawn. Ning Shu sat cross-legged on the sofa and began to cultivate. She must have enough spiritual force to support her to cast a spell. Ning Shu just cultivated for a while, but her heart tightened and her muscles trembled. Danger! Ning Shu opened her eyes and saw sharp blood-red claws coming towards her face. Another vampire. Ning Shu quickly dodged, grabbed the crossbow, and shot an arrow at the vampire. The arrow pierced through the vampire's body, but it didn't cause any substantial damage. The recovery ability of vampires was simply unbelievable. Ning Shu cast a spell towards the vampire. The spell hit the vampire's body and made a chi-chi sound, causing the vampire to roar in pain. Kathy and Tulu, who were outside, heard the commotion and hurried in with their tools. Ning Shu clenched his teeth and cast a body-securing talisman, locking the vampire in place. The vampire's heart was pierced and his head was chopped off by a gravedigger. Ning Shu's muscles were trembling. He leaned against the wall and said, "Is there more than one vampire here?" This town was relatively remote, so why would more than 2 vampires suddenly appear here? Moreover, they only absorbed O-type blood. What a joke. Since when did vampires drink different blood types? Did different blood types lead to different tastes? Type A was matcha flavored, while Type B was strawberry flavored. Kathy took out his cell phone and called the organization to report the situation here. He hoped the organization could send other blood hunters to investigate the situation. Tulu pulled the dead vampire out. The sky was starting to brighten. It was already dawn. Tulu poured gasoline on the corpse and set it on fire. The air rippled with a strange smell, mixed with the smell of oil. Ning Shu was cultivating in her room. Kathy lit up one cigarette after another, causing the room to be filled with smoke. Ning Shu opened his eyes. "Can you stop smoking?" Kathy put out the cigarette. "I have a bad feeling. This mission isn't that simple. The organization probably didn't expect this. But you can't smoke like that. It feels like we're in paradise," Ning Shu said. "I'm going out. Call me if you need anything." When Kathy went out, Ning Shu immediately cast a spell and set up a spirit gathering array to speed up his cultivation. Ning Shu absorbed the spiritual energy around him. Kathy felt danger, and so did Ning Shu. He felt that something was about to wake up and open his eyes. With the support of spiritual energy, Ning Shu's emptied dantian gradually eased. It was already dawn. The vampires during the day wouldn't come out for the time being. Even if there were vampires who were not afraid of the sun, they rarely came out. After all, the sun was very uncomfortable. Tulu took some food from the car and gave some to Ning Shu. Ning Shu took the water and jerky. The jerky tasted good. It was chewy and fragrant. Ning Shu tore into the jerky and asked, "Should we leave now and return to the organization or stay and wait for the people from the organization to come?" "Stay. I've already informed the organization." Kathy said, "If we leave now and something happens, we'll be responsible." Ning Shu nodded. "I'll do as you say. Do you think the vampires are collecting blood? Otherwise, why would they kill so many people? Drinking blood once can last for at least a few days. It wasn't like they were eating 3 meals a day like humans. This kind of thing was beyond the plot, so it wasn't mentioned at all. Only the main plot was given, and other details were omitted. The original owner of this body also didn't participate in this mission. After all, he was always behind Mina and cleaning up the mess. We don't know when the people from the organization will come. We need to be vigilant. Tulu took a sip of wine. The sun was high in the sky, and it was extremely hot. The vampires probably wouldn't come out in this kind of weather. Ning Shu increased his cultivation. If they waited until night time, the vampires might come out. Tulu and Fei Rui cleaned their tools and organized them so that they wouldn't be in a hurry. Humans weren't as talented as vampires, so they could only rely on tools. Tulu and Fei Rui were proficient in all kinds of grappling and fighting techniques. Suddenly, he felt that even if he couldn't be a blood hunter, he could still be a bodyguard. However, the salary and benefits couldn't be compared to that of a blood hunter. Once he stepped on this path, there was no turning back. With the blood of vampires on his hands, even if he retired, he would still be found and killed by the vampires. Ning Shu and the other two waited until there was not a single person on the street. It looked very desolate. Either they ran away, or they hid in their homes and didn't come out. Occasionally, there would be a police car patrolling. Ning Shu didn't stop cultivating for a moment. When he was almost done, he bit his finger and squeezed some blood to draw a talisman in the holy water to increase the yang energy of the holy water. Slowly, the sky darkened. Ning Shu and the other two were on high alert. Ahem. Ning Shu suddenly coughed. It was originally very quiet, but Ning Shu's sudden cough made Tulu and Kathy's hearts skip a beat. Kathy looked back at Ning Shu. "What's wrong?" Chapter 1381. What if the vampires know of our existence and don't come looking for us? Ning Shu asked. Our top priority right now is to protect ourselves and wait for the organization to send reinforcements, Tulu said. Ning Shu was just about to nod when she heard a shrill scream. It was a very short scream. It sounded like someone had been cut in half. All three of them stood up. Judging from the sound, it's a bit far from us. Casey couldn't help but scratch the golden hair on his head. It must be the vampires who kidnapped her. Should we go after them? Tulu was hesitant. If they went after them, they might be able to save someone. But if they went after them, the vampires would be at home at night. Human vision was limited. Besides, there was no telling how many vampires there were. Casey took out a scanner. This machine was able to locate vampires through abnormal magnetic fields. The magnetic field around vampires was different from that of humans. Ning Shu leaned over and looked at the scanner. This scanner can only scan a small area. It could only scan a diameter of 200 meters at most. Ning Shu felt that this thing was even worse than a compass. A compass could at least give him directions. Casey didn't find anything. He said to Tulu, "Let's go out tomorrow. The night is too dangerous for us." Blood hunters were humans too. If they were threatened, they would retreat strategically. Ning Shu didn't have any objections. He could train for one more night and get stronger. Even if he couldn't win, he could still run faster. Casey and Tulu took turns to keep watch. They probably didn't want Ning Shu to do so because Ning Shu was a woman. The next morning, the three of them had breakfast and left with their suitcases. Casey held the scanner in his hand. The three of them wandered around the town in the car. Finally, when they passed by a church, something happened to the scanner. It seemed to have detected a vampire. Casey flipped his blonde hair and said handsomely, "Looks like we found it." Tulu looked at the small church. "Don't tell me a vampire is in a church. That's suicidal. Weren't vampires afraid of crosses?" But to the powerful vampires, these things were nothing but harmless things. Ning Shu got out of the car and looked at the church. This church was a little desolate. It looked like an abandoned church. Tulu got out of the car and drew a cross in front of his chest. "Are we going in or not?" Ning Shu asked. Casey said, "Of course. We've already found it." Ning Shu nodded. The three of them entered the church together. As soon as they entered the church, the first thing they saw was Jesus nailed to the cross, a huge cross. There were rows of pews. These benches were supposed to be filled with people attending Mass, but for some reason, they were deserted. Ning Shu held a crossbow in her hand, and the arrow had been smeared with holy water. Moreover, Ning Shu had drawn a talisman on it. If it wasn't a particularly powerful vampire, she could kill one with a single arrow. The walls of the church were filled with black bats. When they sensed that someone had entered, they rushed over. Tulu shot at the bats with his gun. The bats squeaked. Casey was holding the electric baton, which was sizzling with electricity. With a sweep of the baton, a group of bats fell to the ground. There are so many bats in the church. There must be vampires here. Bats were usually associated with vampires. Ning Shu felt the ground tremble. The bats stopped attacking Ning Shu and his companions. Instead, they flew somewhere else. Ning Shu hurried to chase after the bats. The bats swarmed into the basement. Ning Shu didn't care about getting dirty and quickly jumped down. "Molly, wait." Seeing that Ning Shu was running very fast, Kaishi said, "Be careful of any danger." Casey and Tulu jumped down. Ning Shu smelled blood the moment he jumped down. It was so strong that he almost fainted. The path ahead suddenly widened, and Ning Shu saw an exquisite coffin placed in the middle of a pentagonal array. In these grooves, there was fresh blood, which gathered towards the coffin. The coffin was covered with black bats. Vampires knelt around the coffin. The vampires ignored Ning Shu and his companions. They lowered their bodies to the ground as if they were waiting for something powerful. Ning Shu and his companions couldn't act rashly under these circumstances. The bats flapped their wings and slowly moved the coffin away. A powerful aura swept out from the coffin. Then, a pale hand reached out. It was as smooth as jade. No veins could be seen. Vampires came back to life. Casey and Tulu each grabbed one of Ning Shu's arms and dragged Ning Shu away. Ning Shu's hair stood on end. He sensed great danger. Instead, he pulled Casey and Tulu even faster. After the three of them left the church, they quickly drove away. Ning Shu looked back and saw a man in black floating above the church. He wore a black cloak and had bats flying around him. "Hurry up," Ning Shu urged Tulu, who was driving. Casey was almost done with her golden fur. She said to Ning Shu with red eyes, "Molly, we might have run into something big. It's very likely that the dormant third-generation vampires have woken up." Ning Shu, Adam and Eve's eldest son, Cain, was cursed by God for killing his brother. He was forced to drink blood for eternity. After meeting Lilith, who had betrayed the Garden of Eden, he was guided by her. He learned how to extract great power from blood. Cain was the origin of vampires and the beginning of this sinful bloodline. Driven by loneliness, Cain used animal organs and his own blood to create the second generation of vampires. There were 5 of the second generation of vampires. The third generation of vampires were the descendants of the second generation. They were the most powerful generation of vampires. They claimed to have the ability to stand shoulder to shoulder with gods. Therefore, they became the main leaders of the next few generations of vampires. They were known as the Blood Masters. The third generation of vampires established independent families, which were later known as the 13 families. Every third-generation vampire was the ancestor of their own family. The 13 Blood Masters fought fiercely and slaughtered creatures to increase the strength of themselves and their families. They discovered that the blood of vampires could make mortals immortal and enable vampires to become saints. Thus, the prelude to the inheritance of the vampire's sinful bloodline was unveiled. The 13 Blood Masters turned against each other in the end. They fought for years and spread their bloodline wantonly. The vampires called this war the 1,000-Year Holy War. Most of the victims of the war were mortals. Later, although the flood caused by God didn't kill the third-generation vampires, it severely injured them and forced them to go into hibernation. That was why they were so unlucky to encounter such a thing. Also, there were 13 third-generation vampires. Now that one of them had woken up, would the others wake up? If they woke up, would they start another holy war and slaughter mortals? Or turn mortals into vampires? Chapter 1382. He thought it would be a simple mission, but he never expected to run into a third-generation vampire who was said to be as strong as a god. That was terrifying. Ning Shu's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He didn't dare to look back at the vampire. Tulu's body was so stiff that he couldn't even turn the steering wheel. Ning Shu pulled Tulu away. "I'll drive." Ning Shu stepped on the gas pedal, and the car sped off. He could only hope that the newly awakened vampire wouldn't pay attention to small fries like them. That was terrifying. Ning Shu's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He didn't dare to look back at the vampire. Tulu's body was so stiff that he couldn't even turn the steering wheel. Ning Shu pulled Tulu away. "I'll drive." Ning Shu stepped on the gas pedal, and the car sped off. He could only hope that the newly awakened vampire wouldn't pay attention to small fries like them. The vampire must not have recovered his strength yet. Were all the people who died in the town sacrificed to awaken the third-generation vampire? Ning Shu felt a prickling sensation in her back. Her muscles were so tense that they started to twitch uncontrollably. He didn't even dare to blink when sweat dripped into his eyes. Ning Shu turned the steering wheel so fast that Tulu and Cassie felt dizzy from the sudden turn of the car. Ning Shu didn't know how far he had driven, but he didn't care where he went as long as he could get rid of the people behind him. Ning Shu's mind was muddled, and he could only rely on his body to respond. The difference in strength was too great. He couldn't even fight back. An ant versus a giant. Gradually, Ning Shu's body relaxed. He didn't feel the danger anymore. His body would tell him when he was close to danger. Ning Shu's hands that were gripping the steering wheel were trembling, and her legs were shaking uncontrollably. "I'll drive." Tulu took over the wheel. Ning Shu sat next to Kathy. Kathy's voice was trembling. "I was so scared by the vampire that my blood vessels exploded, and I was so scared by your driving skills that I almost peed my pants." Ning Shu shook his legs. "I'm not afraid." Casey was speechless. "Let's hurry back to the organization. We have to report this to the higher-ups." Casey said to Tulu. "The third-generation vampires have awakened. It's already incredible that even one of them has awakened. If the others awaken as well, the holy war will erupt again." Tulu stepped on the gas pedal, causing the car to jerk violently. Ning Shu calmed down and pondered. Anyway, the powerful third-generation vampire had awakened. In other words, the strength of the vampires had increased. Perhaps Fei Rui was able to eliminate the vampire hunters so easily because the higher-ups of the vampire hunters had already been eliminated by the powerful vampires. It was entirely possible. Otherwise, the vampire hunters wouldn't have been so weak. Furthermore, there was the church above the vampire hunters. Were the vampire hunters that had stood tall for so long really going to be destroyed because of a woman, Mina? The third generation of vampires started a holy war, and every one of them was ambitious. The existence of the vampire hunters prevented the vampires from becoming saints, so they would definitely eliminate the vampire hunters. Ning Shu wiped the cold sweat off his face with his sleeve. This wasn't just a simple hero saving the damsel in distress. I feel like we're fish on the chopping board now. Ning Shu sighed. The awakening of the third-generation vampires had basically put the humans at a disadvantage. Should they bombard them with an atomic bomb? It would be like using a cannon to kill a mosquito. Furthermore, the vampires could teleport. It would be a completely bad move. Ning Shu rubbed his forehead. He felt that the sudden appearance of the plot was simply nonsense. It only gave him a simple romantic plot. As for the true nature of the plot, the original owner didn't know. Ning Shu could only guess based on the cause and effect of the matter. The awakening of the third-generation vampires and the elimination of the vampire hunters followed. The two should be related. Ning Shu's mouth was dry. He grabbed the bottle of water and gulped it down. "Leave some for me." Casey snatched the bottle from Ning Shu's hand. After drinking, he even poured water on his head. Layers of goosebumps appeared on his face. Ning Shu and the other two rushed day and night and finally arrived at the manor. The three of them practically rolled and crawled into the manor. Only after entering the manor did they feel a little safer. Ning Shu heaved a long sigh of relief. Kashi scratched his golden hair and laughed. "We've finally escaped death. Let's report this matter." Ning Shu nodded and returned to his room. The room was empty. Mina wasn't there, and the box under the bed wasn't there either. It seemed like she had gone to do a mission. But with Mina's professional skills, the chances of her completing the mission weren't high. Unless someone helped Mina, she really couldn't do it alone. Ning Shu didn't care where Mina went. After all, she had a protector. Ning Shu turned on his computer and wrote a mission report, explaining the mission in detail. He talked about the coffin and the pentagram formation in detail. The vampires collected blood to increase the energy of the vampires in the coffin to revive. After talking about the third-generation vampires in detail, Ning Shu also talked about what happened between Mina and Fei Rui. He didn't hide anything about Fei Rui sending Mina to do the mission. In the end, he directly concluded that Mina betrayed the organization. After finishing the report, Ning Shu sent it to her superiors. Then he sat cross-legged on his bed to cultivate. He originally thought that Fei Rui was enough, but now there was a third-generation vampire. The third-generation vampires were the most powerful among all vampires. They gathered all the strengths of vampires. They killed the second-generation vampires and established the 13 clans. He felt even more urgent. If the third-generation vampires woke up one after another, this world would become a world of vampires again. Would the 13 clans start fighting again? In fact, it didn't matter if they were killed. The problem was that the unlucky ones were the mortals. They often pulled in mortals and turned them into vampires to join the battle. Ning Shu was most worried about the vampire hunters. If the extinction of the vampire hunters was just the beginning, then the situation would be terrible. Generally speaking, when there was a war, the heavens wanted to clean up some things. Ning Shu had to ensure that she would survive in this turmoil. She said that she was going to find Huang Ji and Zhu Sha, but she ran back in a hurry. Ning Shu cast a spell and set up a spirit-gathering formation. Then, he began to cultivate. Not long after, Ning Shu received a call from Tulu, asking him to come out quickly. The higher-ups wanted to talk to them. If the third-generation vampires really woke up, it would be the most important thing for the entire human race. The human race would be destroyed once again. Ning Shu and the other two went to the garden of the manor and saw a woman sitting on a swing. She swung slowly on the swing. Ning Shu, this was the leader of the vampire hunters, a beautiful woman. Chapter 1383. The three of them looked at each other and walked over. Hold on, raise your foot. You're stepping on my little baby. The woman on the swing pointed at Ning Shu's foot. Ning Shu raised his foot and saw a peanut-sized blue flower flattened under her foot. Ning Shu looked apologetic and picked up the flattened flower. It's too small. Is it true that the third generation of vampires has awakened? The woman on the swing asked. She was wearing a red dress that swayed slightly, revealing her smooth calves. She was barefoot and her hair was loose. She was a stunning beauty. Kathy's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and she almost couldn't regain her senses. Tulu nudged him with his elbow, and Casey immediately snapped out of his daze and said, "It's true." The woman in red glanced at Casey. "I don't talk to perverts." Casey was speechless. The woman in red looked at Ning Shu. "Tell me what happened." Ning Shu nodded and told her everything. The woman in red listened to Ning Shu quietly and looked at Ning Shu. "Then how can you be so sure that it's the third generation of vampires? You have to know that vampires have unlimited lifespans. Many of them are so bored that they seal themselves and go into hibernation. The third generation of vampires has been around for a long time. Although the common saying is that they were heavily injured and went into hibernation, most people think that they have disappeared." Ning Shu rolled her eyes and pointed at Kathy. He was the one who said it. He said that the third-generation vampire has awakened. Casey immediately straightened his clothes and planned to give a long speech to show off in front of the beauty. "Let's not talk about this for now. Tell me about your partner and the vampire prince." "I've read your report." Casey was speechless. The woman in red looked at Ning Shu. "You have to know that she's your partner. You've gone through life and death with her. You're despicable and you don't love your partner by telling on her." Ning Shu's expression didn't change. "I've thought it through before reporting her. First of all, Fei Rui is a prince. Do you have any ulterior motives for getting close to Mina like this? Is it for the sake of the vampire hunt? Secondly, from the bottom of my heart, I don't like Mina. She's the kind of person who only cares about herself. She doesn't know how to be united and doesn't love her partner. She clearly knows that vampire hunters can't interact with vampires. I've advised her many times, but she still insists on doing things her own way. She even thinks that I'm being a busybody. My biggest reason is that I want the vampire hunters to remain standing. Only then will I have a foothold." Casey and Tulu witnessed it as well. Tulu and Kathy nodded. Compared to Mina, they were obviously on Ning Shu's side. The woman in red glanced at Ning Shu. "You're quite honest. Let's go. Don't tell anyone about this." The woman in red waved at Ning Shu and the other two. Casey looked at the woman in red reluctantly. The woman in red stared at Casey. "If you keep looking at me with those eyes of yours, I'll gouge out both of your eyes." Kathy hurriedly turned around and left. When they were far away, Ning Shu couldn't help but say, "You're really daring. You really dare to do anything." Tulu said, "I didn't expect the leader of the vampire hunters to be a woman. She's also a very flirtatious woman." Casey rubbed his chin. Ning Shu rolled his eyes. He couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with the two men. He returned to his room and prepared to cultivate. The higher-ups would definitely investigate the awakened vampire. Her goal was to stay alive and improve her strength. She didn't want to be killed by Fei Rui. She also wanted to make things difficult for the two of them. If a third-generation vampire really awakened, then she had to make sure that she didn't die in Fei Rui's hands. At least, she wouldn't be killed by Fei Rui while she was fighting back. If possible, it would be best if she could kill Fei Rui. Taking care of one would cause a pair of lovers to be separated by yin and yang. With this thought, Ning Shu felt that he was really bad. Being separated by yin and yang wasn't a painful thing. Misunderstanding and hurting each other was the right way to go. Ning Shu didn't want to take any more missions. He would stay in the organization and cultivate. Moreover, Ning Shu felt that his luck wasn't too good. What if he took another mission and encountered another awakened vampire? He felt that the world was full of malice toward him. Ning Shu steadily improved his strength, but he still couldn't find the yellow paper and cinnabar with the characteristics of the East. In this place, there was only the cross of holy water, and there was a limited amount of it. Ning Shu could only use his own blood to draw talismans. Her blood contained spirit energy, so it was easy to succeed. The downside was that a woman's body was of the yin attribute, which would reduce the effectiveness of the talisman. To deal with otherworldly items like vampires, he had to use something with yang energy. However, it was better than nothing. For a while, Mina didn't come back. He didn't know where she had gone and forgot to come back. To be honest, following Prince Fei Rui was 10,000 times more comfortable than being a blood hunter. Fei Rui was rich and handsome. Wherever he went, he would be followed. Being in a relationship with such a person was very satisfying. Besides, being in a relationship was beautiful and relaxing. It felt like he wasn't going on a mission, but a vacation. He was so happy that he didn't want to go home. Ning Shu's life seemed to be very leisurely, but it was actually very urgent. When he went to the restaurant to eat, he would occasionally bump into Tulu and Casey. Like Ning Shu, the two of them were scared and hadn't come back to their senses yet. So, they didn't go on any missions for the time being. Ning Shu ate 3 hamburgers in one meal, which scared Tulu and Casey. "Trust me, if you keep eating like this, you'll lose everything," Casey said to Ning Shu. Ning Shu gnawed on the hamburger. "It doesn't matter. I need energy." If he didn't have enough spirit energy, he could only use this method to replenish it. "Your partner hasn't come back yet?" Tulu asked. Ning Shu shook his head and took a sip of yogurt. "It's up to her. I can't control her. If you don't have a partner, you can join me and Casey. We'll form a team together. We've worked together before, so we have some chemistry," Tulu said. Casey nodded. "That's good. Although it's not much to split a mission among 3 people, it's safer." Ning Shu thought about it and nodded in agreement. At least these 2 people seemed reliable. "Hey, did your partner elope with a vampire?" Kathy joked. Ning Shu shrugged. "Maybe." However, Mina had yet to be completely disappointed in the vampire hunter organization as a hero saving a damsel in distress. She still had some concerns. On one hand, she was greedy for Fei Rui. On the other hand, she was wary of the blood hunters. She was afraid that she would be punished. The storyline still had to continue, so Ning Shu felt that Mina would come back. She would walk right into the trap and wait for Fei Rui to save her. However, Ning Shu always had a doubt in his heart. Chapter 1384. Was Fei Rui saving the damsel in distress the start of the Holy War? Did he use this title to destroy the vampire hunters? The more Ning Shu thought about it, the more he felt that it must have been a 3rd-generation vampire who had awakened. Otherwise, although humans and vampires were at odds with each other, this was all in private. The world still seemed to be dominated by humans. But how did vampires suddenly have the confidence to destroy the vampire hunters and break the balance? Ning Shu finished the 3 oversized hamburgers without a change in expression and gulped down 2 bottles of yogurt. Kathy's eyes were wide open. I've seen so many women, but I've never seen someone like you, Kathy said, blinking her eyes. Ning Shu burped. I'm so different. After eating, Ning Shu went back to his room and rubbed his stomach. He felt that the food in his stomach had been digested and turned into energy that flowed to every part of his body. Finally, it gathered in his dantian. Ning Shu opened the door and saw Mina sitting on his bed. She had clearly come back from a long journey, but her face was rosy and full of desire. Ning Shu calculated with his fingers and knew that Mina was in for a romantic disaster. When Mina saw Ning Shu, she didn't know what to say and felt a little awkward. But when she saw that Ning Shu was ignoring her, she didn't even greet him. And the awkwardness in her heart disappeared. Instead, she became depressed. Mina felt a little short of breath when it came to Fei Rui. Her relationship with Fei Rui seemed to be developing in a strange direction. It had exceeded the boundary between vampire hunters and vampires. Mina felt very conflicted, even though Fei Rui had said countless times that he wanted to give her the embrace. But Mina insisted that she absolutely didn't agree. Molly, I've completed a few missions this time, Mina said to Ning Shu. Oh, Ning Shu replied indifferently. Mina was speechless. She had completed so many missions to impress Ning Shu, but Ning Shu's indifferent attitude almost made Mina vomit blood. Jasmine, what exactly do you mean? If you don't want to be my partner, just say it. Don't be so eccentric. I don't want to be your partner. Although Mina already had her suspicions, she still felt wronged when Ning Shu said it out loud. He felt as if his heart had shattered into countless pieces. Ning Shu saw that Mina was staring at him with a look that said, "How can you be so cruel and hurt me like this?" Ning Shu enjoyed it very much. He had really hurt her. He was so happy. I know I might have been a little bad in the past. It's not just a little bad, it's very bad. Mina was on the verge of tears. She had never seen such a cold and heartless person. But I can complete missions on my own now, Mina said. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows and asked in surprise, "You hunted vampires?" Mina immediately nodded. Yes. Ning Shu said in surprise, "Fei Rui actually killed his own kind for you. That's incredible." Mina was speechless. Mina's face was a myriad of colors, and she couldn't help but say, "Jasmine, I feel uncomfortable if I don't mock you." Ning Shu nodded. "I feel uncomfortable if I don't mock you." Mina was so rebuffed by Ning Shu that she didn't want to talk to Ning Shu anymore. She tidied up her things. When Ning Shu saw Mina like this, he knew that she was most likely right. With Mina's skills, killing a vampire on her own and even cremating it. She couldn't have done it on her own. At most, Fei Rui would have waved his hand, and the vampire would have been reduced to ashes. If Mina had been killed by him, he wouldn't have argued with her. Mina was someone who could argue with reason even if she didn't. Ning Shu clicked his tongue. Mina put down the things in her hands in annoyance. Ning Shu said, "Jasmine, what right do you have to look down on me? What right do I need? Even I can look down on you. No stance, no skills. I think you want to become a vampire, to live forever and keep your face." Ning Shu's words were very blunt. Mina stood up. "Jasmine, it's easy for you to say that. I met the right person, and that person is just a vampire. I don't believe that you can still be so righteous when you meet love." Ning Shu spread his hands. "Why can't I be righteous? Even if a vampire likes me, I won't change my stance. I clearly know that vampire hunters and vampires are on opposite sides. Although I don't want to make myself sound so noble, vampire hunters are indeed the last line of defense for humans." Mina sneered, "Hypocrite, you sound so righteous." Ning Shu also laughed disdainfully. "Don't use your personal feelings to measure my feelings. You're so petty. Look at you. You're a vampire hunter, but you only think about vampires. You don't have your own principles and stance. What right do you have to laugh at me for being righteous? You grew up as a vampire hunter, but for a vampire, you want to abandon it. People like you should be thrown into the smelly ditch. What's the point of raising you? Mina's face turned red. She angrily said, "You're so extreme. Don't make yourself sound so noble. Moreover, vampires and humans have signed a peace treaty." Naive. All alliances are built on the condition that both sides are evenly matched. When the weak can be slaughtered by others, who would care about alliances? You haven't met anyone you like, so you're saying it like that. You really think that one day, you'll know that you can't wait to destroy the heavens and earth to be with him. But for someone like you, no one will like you. Was this how women attacked other women? No man likes you. You're a loser. Ning Shu didn't feel that he was pitiful at all. Begging for someone's love was pitiful, and he even used begging for love to show off. Ning Shu liked the way gentlemen interacted with each other. Moreover, Ning Shu knew that he was a selfish person. No one was more important than himself. Ning Shu spread his hands. So, I don't have any worries in this regard. I won't destroy the heavens and earth just to be with one person. You. Mina was speechless. This person was really annoying. She remembered that Jasmine wasn't this annoying. Jasmine was clearly so understanding and magnanimous. But the current Jasmine was really difficult to deal with. Don't you know that your sharp tongue is really annoying? Ning Shu said casually. I'm just saying what I want to say. That's sharp tongue. I'm just saying it, but you've already done it. You've directly used your actions to prove how annoying you are. Mina was so angry that her cheeks puffed up. Jasmine, you're just jealous of me. Ning Shu. Why would I be jealous of you? I'm jealous that you have nothing and still have vampire love. Chapter 1385. Let me tell you, I don't know how many couples I've met, but I'm still alive because I'm open-minded. Do you think I'll be jealous of you? Mina. Ning Shu pursed his lips. Let's see if you can act cute for the rest of your life. Mina. So annoying, this person is so annoying. That's right, why would anyone like someone like you? Mina was exasperated. It doesn't matter, there are plenty of people who hate me. Who do you think you are? Ning Shu was calm and composed. She couldn't please everyone, so why did she have to torment herself and make things difficult for herself? You're really thick-skinned, really shameless. Mina felt that Ning Shu was the most thick-skinned person she had ever met. Ning Shu shrugged his shoulders indifferently. I'm not as thick-skinned as you. You're even going to elope with a vampire. Was being a little more considerate of herself considered being thick-skinned? She could be even thicker. Even if she was thick-skinned, she didn't hurt anyone. And Mina, this thick-skinned person, did all sorts of despicable things. She even thought that she was the most innocent person in the world. Mina was so angry at Ning Shu that she was about to cry, and she said angrily, I just like Fei Rui, so what? Is it wrong for me to like someone? Whether it's wrong or not is not something I can judge. Ning Shu shrugged his shoulders, ignoring Mina. Mina sat on the bed, fuming. Her face was bright red, and she looked very cute. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Mina was still angry and didn't get up to open the door. Ning Shu got up from the bed and went to open the door. The person who opened the door was a man in a suit, followed by 5 fully armed people with guns in their hands. I'm a vampire hunter supervisor. Is Mina inside? The man in the lead asked. Ning Shu's heart skipped a beat. The vampire hunter supervisor was responsible for punishing vampire hunters who made mistakes. So, was he going to punish Mina now? Ning Shu leaned to the side. She's inside. The 5 people entered the room, and 4 of them pointed their guns at Mina. With a gun pointed at her, Mina was a little confused. Then, she thought of something and her face turned pale. "Blood Hunter Mina, please come with us to assist in the investigation," the supervisor said coldly. Having grown up in the organization, Mina naturally knew what this meant. Usually, they would only arrest someone when there was conclusive evidence. Did the organization know about her relationship with Fei Rui? Fei Rui had really killed her. With so many guns pointed at her, Mina's heart was thumping wildly. Besides, with her ability, even if she wanted to escape, she wouldn't be able to. Mina was escorted away, and Mina turned to look at Ning Shu, her eyes full of accusation. "Jasmine, was it you? Did you betray me? Why are you treating me like this? I hate you." Mina was heartbroken. Ning Shu ignored Mina's accusatory gaze and took out the offer he had given Mina before. Mina admitted that she was very close to the vampire prince vampire hunter. "This is the evidence." The inspector took Ning Shu's phone. "I'll return it to you after the investigation is done." Ning Shu nodded. Mina was stunned and looked at Ning Shu in disbelief. Her eyes were filled with despair. "Jasmine, I hate you." Ning Shu was like a villain. "It doesn't matter. I'm happy to see you in pain." Mina opened her mouth but couldn't say anything for a long time. "Do you hate me that much? What unforgivable thing did I do to you that you have to treat me like this? I just can't stand seeing you acting so innocent. TSK, TSK, TSK. It's obvious that you're close to the vampire prince, but you're still acting so innocent. You said that I betrayed you, so I exposed you. What's wrong with that?" Ning Shu raised his chin and looked down at her. Mina was speechless. Mina was taken away by the armed men. Ning Shu closed the door and hurriedly turned on his computer. He reported that Mina had been captured and that the vampire prince vampire hunter might come to rescue her. They should be prepared. Also, Fei Rui could mobilize the elite forces of the blood breeds. Ning Shu submitted the report and began to cultivate. Now that Mina was locked up, he wasn't far from saving the damsel in distress. He wasn't far from the death of the client. The client, Jasmine, had been torn in half by Fei Rui. Her organs and intestines were scattered on the ground, emitting white smoke. In order to avoid being torn apart by his own hands, he had to speed up his cultivation and become stronger. Also, he had to teach Fei Rui a lesson this time. Ning Shu had nothing to do, so he wandered around the manor and moved some stones around to set up a yang gathering formation. Even if Fei Rui came, he could weaken him a little. Even if he couldn't weaken him, he could weaken the vampires he brought with him. Not every vampire was as powerful as he was. However, the side effect of setting up the yang gathering formation was that the manor was too hot. It was as if all the sunlight was gathered here. It could easily cause endocrine disorders. Ning Shu was speechless. However, under the effect of the yang gathering formation, Ning Shu's talisman had more yang energy. Usually, when Ning Shu left his room, he would see that the manor was more heavily guarded. It seemed that the higher-ups had seen his report. It might not be useful, but it could definitely reduce the losses. This was just on the surface. There might be other preparations in private. Ning Shu sat in the room. She lacked spirit qi. Spirit qi. There was too little spirit qi. Ning Shu faced the electric fan. It was too damn hot. If he had known, he wouldn't have set up the yang gathering formation so early. It was just that he wasn't strong enough now. If he was strong enough, he wouldn't have been able to fight them. He would have killed them directly. Ning Shu wiped the sweat off his forehead. It was already summer, and with the help of the yang gathering formation, Ning Shu felt like he was in a steamer. Damn it! How good would it be if the heat was spirit qi? Ning Shu's mind suddenly exploded. Heat was also energy. Why couldn't she absorb it? She remembered that when she was in the galaxy, she also absorbed other types of energy. Ning Shu was excited. If she could really succeed, her ultimate martial arts wouldn't be restricted by spirit chi anymore. Ning Shu sat cross-legged and began to absorb the surrounding heat. The heat drilled into Ning Shu's body. After a while, Ning Shu's skin turned red as if it was scalded. Ning Shu opened his mouth and white smoke came out. Damn it, sure enough, not everything could be absorbed. However, Ning Shu felt a hot energy gathering in her dantian, making her body very hot. The muscles all over her body felt like they were being roasted in a raging fire. The energy of fire was indeed not as docile as spirit chi. However, the advantage was that the energy was inexhaustible. Ning Shu continued to cultivate with her red skin. A red energy appeared in her dantian. It was the size of a hair and looked like a red line. Probably because her body was used to such heat, the red color slowly faded from her skin. It returned to white. However, Ning Shu was very excited because she found an energy that could replace spirit chi. In this world, there was wind energy and heat energy. Moreover, heat energy was inexhaustible. No spirit chi could absorb heat energy. Chapter 1386. After absorbing some yang energy, Ning Shu felt a burning sensation in her dantian. Spirit energy and heat were mixed together, making Ning Shu feel as if she was about to be incinerated. His dantian was fiery red, like a pool of magma. Ning Shu clenched her fists. She felt as if there was a small universe in her body that was about to explode. She had indeed absorbed fire energy. Ning Shu felt as if she was about to go berserk. Fire was not as gentle as spirit energy. There was a limit to spirit energy, but this kind of energy was inexhaustible. From now on, she would no longer be restricted by spirit energy. No matter how little spirit energy there was, she could absorb the energy of the sun and gather the yang energy around her. She could still be powerful. However, this kind of energy was more restless. Even her emotions were very restless. Ning Shu really wanted to find someone to fight now. Ning Shu was very excited. She started to absorb the energy around her like crazy. Anyway, she had set up a yang gathering array. Ning Shu did not go out for a few days. She had been cultivating. A pool of lava appeared in her dantian. Furthermore, there was a fiery red dragon swimming in the lava. Ning Shu really wanted to roar. Indeed, as long as there was enough energy, there was no bottleneck to ultimate martial arts. In the past, this effect could only be achieved in the cultivation world with a lot of spirit energy. However, she had reached this level in such a short time. If she faced Fei Rui again, she would definitely be able to fight him head-on. She released the fire dragon to burn Fei Rui to death. Ning Shu left the room and prepared to eat. Along the way, many people stared at Ning Shu strangely. Ning Shu was a little confused. Were they bowing down to her powerful abilities? Ha ha ha, Ning Shu walked all the way to the dining room. There were always people looking at her strangely. Jasmine, what happened to your hair? And your face? Kathy looked at Ning Shu in disbelief. Did you have a perm? Ning Shu put down her plate and touched her head. She felt an afro and it was very fluffy. Ning Shu quickly took out her phone and turned on the camera. She realized that her hair was all up and her face was black. She looked like she had just returned from a fire. Ning Shu was speechless. She should have looked in the mirror when she went out. However, Ning Shu was thick-skinned and sat down to eat without batting an eyelid. Kathy sat across from Ning Shu and asked, "Do you know the results of Mina's trial?" Ning Shu bit into his hamburger and said, "Anyway, the outcome won't be good. Such a serious incident has never happened to a vampire hunter, so the punishment won't be light. The main thing is to make an example out of them. It's meant to warn us blood hunters." Kathy nodded. I think so too. I think the prince treats Mina differently. Have you ever thought about it? What if that prince asks the vampire hunter for Mina? Casey asked. Ning Shu couldn't help but laugh. If I were a high-ranking vampire hunter and the vampires asked for someone, I would definitely kill that person. If someone betrays the vampire hunters in the future, the vampire hunters will have no dignity and stand, and will even kill the person who betrays the vampire hunters. Kathy stared at Ning Shu. Do you hate Mina that much? No, everything I do is based on the vampire hunters. Ning Shu said, when the nest is overturned, no egg will remain intact. It seemed that the vampire hunters relied on the blood hunters to support them, but the vampire hunters gave them a foothold. 1 year as a blood hunter, 1 lifetime as a blood hunter, and the identity of a blood hunter would follow them for life. Do you want to do a mission? Kathy asked. Tulu and I plan to take a mission and go out for a walk. It's a very simple mission. Ning Shu thought that if he went out to do a mission at this time, he could avoid Fei Rui and save the damsel in distress. However, Ning Shu didn't want to avoid it. He wanted to test his strength. Moreover, if he avoided it for now, he would eventually encounter it in the future. He could only face it head-on. Ning Shu shook his legs. I still want to rest, so I won't go for now. You're still scared? I'm not scared. Was the one who woke up last time a third-generation vampire? Ning Shu asked Kathy. Kathy patted his chest. Trust me, that was definitely a third-generation vampire. Didn't you notice that there was a crown on the coffin? It should be a vampire from the Lucen clan. This clan's vampires are elegant and aggressive. Ning Shu vaguely remembered. But it only means that it's a vampire from the Lucen clan. It doesn't mean that it's a third-generation vampire. Have the results of the investigation been released? Even if they did, they wouldn't spread the news and cause panic. Ning Shu spread her hands. Anyway, she wasn't very afraid now. With strength came confidence, and with food came confidence. Even if it really was a third-generation vampire, Ning Shu felt that he could go up and scratch it. If he couldn't beat it, he would immediately run away. After eating 4 super hamburgers, Ning Shu returned to his room and began to cultivate. The stronger he was, the better. The atmosphere in the manor was getting more and more tense. Although they didn't know what was going on, everyone felt that the atmosphere was very strange. Kathy and Tulu were originally going to accept a mission, but they were told that all the blood hunters couldn't leave the manor for a while. Soon, a punishment ceremony would be held to punish the blood hunters who made mistakes. As the time was getting closer and closer, Ning Shu began to prepare. Last time, Fei Rui scratched her face. This time, she wanted to do the same. She must take revenge. Soon, the people above informed all the blood hunters to come to the square. Ning Shu arrived at the square and saw Mina tied to a cross in the middle of the square. Her face was full of panic and fear. The woman in the red dress stood on the high platform. The breeze blew at the corners of her dress. She looked quite beautiful and ethereal. It seemed that she was going to personally preside over the ceremony. Ning Shu secretly cast a spell, and a red light invaded Mina's body. This spell didn't do any harm to Mina, but it would make her unable to speak for 4 hours. In a state of speechlessness, the woman in the red dress stood on the high platform and said simply, "The punishment is death, cut in half at the waist." The onlooking blood hunters cried out in alarm when they heard that they would be cut in half. Cutting in half at the waist was a punishment from the Middle Ages. Although it was called cutting in half at the waist, it was actually sawing from the bottom up. The prisoner's mind was clear and wouldn't die for a while. Even if the stomach was cut, the prisoner would clearly feel the extreme pain. And it was with a saw, pulling and tearing. It was simply too much. Just thinking about it made people shudder. When Mina heard that he would be cut in half, the blood drained from her face. She wanted to say something, but no words came out of her mouth. Mina's mouth was agape, but she couldn't say a single word. Mina was so anxious that her face turned red. She opened her mouth and wanted to shout. The veins on her neck bulged, but she couldn't say a word. Ning Shu's expression was cold. Ning Shu asked Kathy, "What's wrong with her? She's probably scared out of her wits." Chapter 1387. Casey shook his head and said, "The vampire hunters haven't been sentenced to such a heavy sentence in many years. If a third-generation vampire is really resurrected, the vampire hunters will have to use force. It's Mina's fault for coming at such a sensitive time," Ning Shu analyzed. Perhaps Fei Rui had destroyed the vampire hunters in the name of saving Mina. This could be a signal from the awakened vampire. Ning Shu clenched his fists. He really wanted Fei Rui to stay in the manor. It would be best if he could destroy Fei Rui. "Begin the execution," the vampire hunter supervisor said. Then, there were two people holding large saws. The saws were incomparably shiny and the teeth were sharp. Under the illumination of the sun, they flashed a little bit of light. It made one's heart turn cold. Mina looked at the saws that were getting closer and closer to her. She was extremely scared and kept shaking her head. Her face was distorted from fear. She wanted to speak, she wanted to beg for mercy, but she couldn't make a sound. Mina suspected that she was dreaming. Otherwise, why would something like this happen? The large saws were placed between Mina's legs. They were just waiting for the order to start sawing from the bottom up. Mina was so scared that her whole body was trembling. She looked around, trying to find someone to save her. Her gaze stopped on Ning Shu. She looked at Ning Shu with a pleading and helpless expression. It was a cry for help. Ning Shu's heart was as hard as iron. He even smiled at Mina. Mina saw Ning Shu's smile and was stunned for a moment. She shivered all over. Mina felt extremely wronged. Why did Mina treat her like this? Ning Shu wasn't worried at all about the bloody scene that would follow. As the female lead, how could her crotch be cut open? Soon, Fei Rui would bring a large group of vampires and ride on a rainbow cloud to save the damsel in distress. Ning Shu closed his eyes and began to adjust his state of mind. There was definitely going to be a big battle later. There was a fiery red magma-like energy surging in his dantian. There were also fire dragons surging in the magma. Such a powerful fire energy would definitely cause harm to those vampires. Carry out the punishment. The woman in the red dress standing on the high platform said with a solemn expression. Just as the two men with the saw were about to begin, a voice boomed, "Stop right there." Sure enough, at the critical moment, if he had been just a little bit late, Mina's flower would have been destroyed. When Ning Shu heard the address of this king, he nearly thought that he had transmigrated again. How could a vampire address himself as this king? The woman in the red dress stood on the high platform and frowned as she watched the group of people fly in. Ning Shu estimated that Fei Rui had brought more than 100 vampires with him this time. Every one of them was dressed in black and wore a black cloak. Fei Rui, who was in the lead, was dressed in a luxurious suit. He looked at Mina, who was tied to a rack. Mina was trembling like a flower that had been ravaged by a storm. Her face was filled with fear, and even her pupils were dilating. In short, he was scared silly. When Mina saw Fei Rui, she immediately started crying. Her tears fell as she stared straight at Fei Rui. She looked pitiful. When Fei Rui saw this, his eyes turned even redder. It was so red that it looked like blood was about to drip out. When a vampire was angry, their eyes would turn red. Fei Rui was very angry now. He looked at the woman in the red dress on the high platform and said loudly, "Don't you think you're going overboard?" The woman in the red dress said indifferently, "Overboard? What does it have to do with you how I deal with my vampire hunters people? What right do you have to criticize me?" Fei Rui's expression was tense as he said domineeringly, "What if I have to take her away today? Mina belongs to me. Since when is it your turn to deal with her? Mina grew up among the vampire hunters. She belongs to them regardless of life or death. Since you didn't embrace Mina, what right do you have to say that Mina belongs to you?" The woman in the red dress raised her eyebrows and swept her gaze over Fei Rui and Mina. The woman in the red dress was like a rose with thorns. She looked at Mina coldly. "Is this how you repay the vampire hunters who raised you? The vampire hunters are an organization. Anyone who makes a mistake must be punished." Mina lowered her head, not daring to meet the woman's gaze. "Dai Lin, if there's anything, just talk to me directly. Why do you have to make things difficult for a 17 or 18-year-old girl?" Fei Rui said coldly. Because of his anger, his eyes were bloodshot. Coupled with his exquisite face, he looked exceptionally evil. His sharp teeth were bared, as if he was about to bite someone at any time. "What if I have to take her away today? If you insist on not doing so, then the vampire hunters and vampires will definitely go to war," Fei Rui threatened. The woman in the red dress, Dai Lin, stared at Fei Rui coldly. "What if I don't let her go today?" "Then there's no other way," Fei Rui said helplessly. Ning Shu suddenly stood up and coughed. He said to the leader, "Dai Lin, actually, we can let Mina go." Dai Lin looked at Ning Shu coldly. "Whoever interferes will be cut in half at the waist." Ning Shu said, "You've really wronged Mina. Mina would never betray the vampire hunters." "Oh, what do you mean?" Dai Lin seemed to be very curious. If Mina didn't betray the vampire hunters, then it would be a little embarrassing for Fei Rui to save her. Fei Rui looked down at them condescendingly. His sharp teeth moved, and his expression was arrogant. Mina was speechless. Even Mina herself thought that she had betrayed the vampire hunters. After all, she really did have feelings for Fei Rui. But now, Jasmine actually said that she didn't betray the vampire hunters. What was going on? She had betrayed her before, and when she asked for help just now, she turned a blind eye to it. Now, she jumped out and said that she was wronged. What was Jasmine trying to do? Was she trying to act nice in front of Fei Rui? Could it be that Jasmine also liked Fei Rui, so she was acting like this in front of him? The more Mina thought about it, the angrier she got. This woman was too hypocritical. She had previously said that she wouldn't betray the vampire hunters and had a firm stand and principles. But now, she was acting pretentious in front of the person she liked. Mina opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. She could only look at Fei Rui anxiously. Please don't listen to this woman's words. She betrayed me." Mina had thousands of words to say, but she couldn't say them. Seeing the smile on Ning Shu's face, Mina had a bad feeling in her heart. Ning Shu stood on the stage and said to Dai Lin, the woman in the red dress, "Mina actually walked like this on purpose. This way, Fei Rui would bring the vampires to save her. Once the vampires are trapped, the stronger vampires will be eliminated. This will weaken the vampires' strength. Mina and I didn't do well, so we came up with this idea." Ning Shu spouted nonsense. He described Mina as a righteous person who sacrificed herself for the sake of the organization's great image. Chapter 1388. When Ning Shu said this, he was flustered. Not only was Ning Shu flustered, but even Mina had an incredulous expression on her face. When did she plan something like this with Jasmine? What kind of nonsense was Jasmine talking about? Mina raised her head and saw Fei Rui floating in the air. Fei Rui's expression was ugly, and he looked hesitant. Mina instantly understood why Ning Shu said this. She was trying to drive a wedge between her and Fei Rui. In all honesty, she really didn't want to use a honey trap to trick Fei Rui into coming to the manor. Mina opened and closed her mouth at Fei Rui, but she couldn't say anything. She was so anxious that tears streamed down her face. When Fei Rui saw Mina crying, he turned around and looked at the group of vampires behind him. He suspected that Mina was doing this on purpose. Fei Rui was in an awkward position now. He had brought a large group of people here, and now he realized that he might have fallen into a honey trap. It was the vampire hunter's doing. But the Mina he knew was definitely not someone like that. Maybe Mina didn't know and was being used by the vampire hunters. The woman in the red dress narrowed her eyes, then smiled like a beautiful rose. So that's what happened. Since it's a misunderstanding, then you don't have to be cut in half. Someone immediately untied Mina. Mina's feelings were extremely complicated. She would rather be tied up. She couldn't say anything, and she had no way to explain. Ning Shu walked over and held Mina's arm. He smiled sweetly. Mina, it's been hard on you. You've done a lot to attract so many vampires. From now on, I only want a quarter of the rewards. The rest is yours, Ning Shu said with a smile. Mina pushed Ning Shu away, but Ning Shu only took a step back and stopped steadily. He wasn't angry at all, and he still looked at Mina with a smile. Mina couldn't speak, so she could only wave at Fei Rui. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. There was no way to explain. Mina was disheartened and looked at Ning Shu with eyes full of hatred. Ning Shu was still smiling as he reached out his hand to pull Mina away. Let's go. The next battle isn't something we can participate in. You've already made a great contribution. To prevent Fei Rui from venting his anger on you, let's leave first, Ning Shu said with concern. With every word Ning Shu said, Mina and Fei Rui's faces darkened. Mina wanted to shake off Ning Shu's hand, but with Ning Shu's tight grip, she couldn't break free at all. Dai Lin smiled and said, the next battle is indeed not something the two of you can worry about. Since you have made such a great contribution, you will be rewarded in the future. Ning Shu looked at Dai Lin. Although Dai Lin was smiling, there was no trace of a smile in her eyes. This showed that she was very unhappy. However, after protecting the reputation of the vampire hunters and making the vampires unhappy, Dai Lin took advantage of the situation. The evidence of Mina's betrayal of the vampire hunters was conclusive. After dealing with these vampires, they would deal with them. Mina was panicking. She couldn't leave. She had to explain everything to Fei Rui. She didn't plan anything. She didn't know anything. Molly had set her up on purpose. Ning Shu used a little strength and pulled Mina away. Mina's strength was not worth mentioning in front of Ning Shu. Ning Shu pulled Mina back into the room. Mina's lips moved as if she was talking to Ning Shu, but no sound came out. Mina was so angry that she reached out to hit Ning Shu. This woman was too vicious, too vicious. Ning Shu grabbed Mina's wrist and used his other hand to chop Mina unconscious. Ning Shu dragged Mina to the bed and tied her hands and feet with rope. Then he tied her to the bed. After doing this, Ning Shu locked the door and went to the square. The two sides had already started fighting because the vampires that Fei Rui brought were all elites. Many of them were nobles. Therefore, the vampire hunters were at a disadvantage. Many of them had their chests pierced by the vampire's claws. The smell of blood was so strong that it made it hard for people to breathe. This was a one-sided massacre. Ning Shu saw the battle between Fei Rui and Dai Lin on the high platform. Dai Lin was holding a white staff in her hand. The staff released a white halo. Ning Shu, what did she see? Could it be that Dai Lin was really a magician? He felt like he was going to be drunk. Ning Shu's fingers moved quickly. With the support of the Yang Gathering formation, he formed a huge talisman. This talisman burned with a raging fire. As soon as the talisman appeared, the surrounding air became extremely hot. The huge talisman turned into countless rays of light and flew towards the vampires. When the talisman touched the vampires' bodies, it immediately ignited into a raging fire. The vampires jumped and tried to slap the flames on their bodies. However, the flames couldn't be extinguished. Instead, they burned even more fiercely. The vampires howled in pain and finally turned into ashes. Ning Shu, holy shit. He didn't expect this at all. This talisman was the most yang energy between heaven and earth. Vampires were nocturnal creatures that were afraid of sunlight. With the support of such energy, the talisman was simply the bane of vampires. The other blood hunters were horrified. Many of them stared blankly at Ning Shu. It was as if they were looking at a monster. Fei Rui, who was fighting on the high platform, noticed the situation below. He was stunned for a moment. Dai Lin seized the opportunity and the white light hit Fei Rui. Fei Rui flew down the high platform and tried to stop Ning Shu. Ning Shu smiled and formed a hand seal. He dodged Fei's attack and a talisman flew towards Fei Rui. Fei Rui saw with his own eyes that the vampires he brought with him were turned into ashes. He wouldn't let the talisman get close to him. Fei Rui teleported to avoid the talisman. He suddenly appeared behind Ning Shu and extended his sharp claws. He wanted to use his nails to pierce through Ning Shu's body. Ning Shu dodged. "You're not the only one who's fast." Ning Shu sent out a fire dragon. When the flames touched Fei Rui's clothes, Fei Rui immediately took off his cloak. The flames on the cloak crackled. Fei Rui gave up on his cloak. Fei Rui's originally pale and bloodless face turned ashen. His eyes were incomparably red, striking fear into those who looked at him. "Where's Mina? Tell Mina to come out." Fei Rui's teeth were even sharper. Ning Shu shrugged. "Mina has already left. She doesn't need to see you." "I don't believe you." Fei Rui stared at Ning Shu with his bloodshot eyes. "Believe it or not, it's up to you. In any case, Mina won't see you again. This was our plan from the beginning. You've seen my strength. I'm really tired of you vampires. You use this method to wipe out your elites." Chapter 1389. Of course, if you think that Mina loves you, then Mina and I don't mind. Ning Shu spouted nonsense with her white teeth. Anyway, it was good to make these two misunderstand. It would be best if they had a love-hate relationship. "Let me explain. I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen." This was a good situation. Fei Rui's face turned even paler. It was almost the color of a corpse. Fei Rui roared. His teeth became big and sharp. "Die for me." Ning Shu was not afraid of Fei Rui at all. She quickly formed a seal with her fingers. Her speed was so fast that her fingers left afterimages. Ning Shu's face turned a little pale, as she formed an extremely complicated talisman. This talisman slowly appeared between Ning Shu's fingers. The talisman was golden in color. It was very solid and clashed with Fei Rui. Fei Rui was furious, especially when he found out that Mina had betrayed him. He ignored all opposition and led a group of people to face this situation. Even though he knew that this Eastern spell was very powerful, he still chose to face it head-on. The two of them clashed, creating a powerful shockwave that swept across the surroundings. Many people were affected and were thrown to the ground. Fei Rui was hit by the talisman. His body was covered in flames. However, Fei Rui was very strong. He was not burned to ashes like the other vampires. Under the burning flames, Fei Rui was in a lot of pain. Ning Shu made up her mind. It was best to get rid of Fei Rui now. Ning Shu stretched out her hand and attacked Fei Rui's heart. She wanted to crush Fei Rui's heart. Although a vampire's heart did not beat, it was the source of power. Without the support of the heart, Fei Rui would be burned to ashes like the other vampires. Fei Rui was very strong. Even with the talisman, how could he let Ning Shu take out his heart? He stretched out his fist and fought with Ning Shu. Ning Shu and Fei Rui's punches landed on each other. Ning Shu felt that Fei Rui's body was like a steel plate. Every time she hit him, the rebound force hurt his organs. On the other hand, Fei Rui felt that Ning Shu's strength was immense. He felt as though his body was about to be torn apart. Could it be that a vampire's physique was inferior to a human's? Fei Rui knew that he was in a bad situation. The flames were making him feel extremely uncomfortable, and his strength was slowly weakening. If he didn't think of a way, he would really be left here. The elites of the vampires would be buried here. Thinking of this, Fei Rui became even angrier. He hated Mina even more. This was the first time he had been so nice to a human, yet he had been tricked. He was a man who had lived for God knows how long, yet he had been deceived by a 17-year-old human girl. Was he blind, or was it because Mina's acting skills were so good that he was fooled? He looked around and did not see Mina. Was that woman not going to come out and explain herself? Ever since she saw him, Mina hadn't said a single word. Did that mean she had silently agreed? The energy in Fei Rui's body continued to decrease. Not only did he have to resist the power of the talisman, but he also had to deal with Ning Shu. Fei Rui casually grabbed a blood hunter and bit the neck of the blood hunter. Very quickly, he sucked the blood hunter's blood dry and tossed the corpse aside. Ning Shu's expression was cold. His hands quickly formed a seal, and another talisman fell on Fei Rui's body. Fei Rui's complexion became worse and worse. His face actually started to rot, revealing his white bones. Fei Rui's expression was hideous. You deserve to die, you deserve to die. Vampires had always been elegant. Being exposed in front of so many people made Fei Rui very angry. Although he was angry, he was more afraid. Eastern spells were too powerful. They were more powerful than Holy Cross water. Every second he stayed here, he would lose more of his strength. Fei Rui called out helplessly. The rhythm of the sound wave was very strange, and it traveled very far. Dai Lin said, "Quickly get rid of him. He's summoning other vampires." As soon as Dai Lin finished speaking, she looked up at the sky and her pupils constricted. Ning Shu looked at the sky and saw a man in formal attire with a cloak draped over his shoulders. There were bats flying around him. When Fei Rui saw this person, he immediately flew to his side. The man opened his mouth and said something difficult to understand. Fei Rui lowered his head in shame. A drop of blood appeared between the man's eyebrows and imprinted itself on Fei Rui's forehead. Then, the flames on Fei Rui's body gradually extinguished. When Ning Shu saw this scene, his jaw almost dropped. How could a drop of blood be so powerful? If he remembered correctly, this was the vampire they had met at the church. Ning Shu approached Dai Lin and whispered, "This vampire is the one who woke up. Judging by his strength, he must be a third-generation vampire." Dai Lin nodded. "He speaks in the ancient language. He's most likely a third-generation vampire. None of us here are a match for him. If it weren't for God's flood and humanity's arrival on Noah's boat, we would have been reared by the vampires by now." Dai Lin's expression was grave. He really was a third-generation vampire. A single drop of blood could be so powerful. They were indeed a race that could stand shoulder to shoulder with God. She wondered how much blood he had in his body. Fei Rui spoke to the third-generation vampire, but his eyes kept darting toward Ning Shu. Then, the third-generation vampire said something difficult to understand to Ning Shu. "Ning Shu." Ning Shu was dumbfounded. He had no idea what the vampire was talking about. Ning Shu said to Fei Rui, "What did your ancestor say? Translate for him." Fei Rui's expression was cold. You've inherited the arts of the East. Why did you set foot in the West? Do you want to start a war? My legs are on my body. I can go wherever I want. What does it have to do with you? Ning Shu said. Then, he said to Fei Rui, translate for your ancestor. Fei Rui sneered and continued talking to the third-generation vampire. The third-generation vampire frowned. He looked at Ning Shu calmly, as if he was looking at an ant. There was no emotion in his eyes. His face was very pale. It was as white as a sheet of paper. He wore black clothes. Black and white formed a sharp contrast. Wearing anything was better than wearing black. Was he afraid that others wouldn't know that he was a vampire? Did he not know that black absorbed more heat? At #yen%. The third-generation vampire said again. Ning Shu was speechless. He said to Fei Rui, be a good interpreter. Your ancestor has been out of touch with the world for too long. Learn how to communicate with others. Don't let others spoil him. Ning Shu saw Fei Rui's terrified expression in front of the third-generation vampire. He suddenly felt that there was nothing to be afraid of. He was no longer as wary of Fei Rui as before. Ning Shu had already placed himself in the same position as the third-generation vampire. Her opponent now was a third-generation vampire. He was no longer the Fei Rui she used to fear. Chapter 1390. Although Fei Rui had the blood from the third-generation vampire, the wounds on his face had already healed. However, his face was still ashen. It was the color of someone who had been dead for several days. No matter how heaven-defying his looks were, his complexion wasn't impressive, and he looked a lot more lackluster. Moreover, there was a third-generation vampire beside him who was said to be as powerful as a god. Ning Shu's attitude towards him was especially disdainful. This made Fei Rui very angry. Since when did a human have the right to look down on him? Fei Rui's lips moved, revealing his sharp teeth. Ning Shu let out a hoarse roar as if he was demonstrating his power. Ning Shu was expressionless. What are you doing? Your ancestor and I are both waiting for you to translate. What are you shouting for? Fei Rui, I'm asking you which Eastern sorcery you inherited. Fei Rui asked coldly. Ning Shu smiled and said, I formed my own sect. Moreover, how can I say my master's name so casually? Fei Rui purposely showed his sharpness. I advise you to speak properly. You will be turned into ashes in an instant. The bloodlings called third-generation vampires blood masters. Ning Shu raised his chin. Come on, come on. I'm so scared. Come and hit me. Whoever doesn't hit me is a bastard. The onlookers, how despicable. Fei Rui had lived for so long and thought that he had good self-control. However, he was still angered by Ning Shu's shamelessness. Another reason was that he was afraid of Ning Shu. That was why he was so angry. If Ning Shu was just an ant, Fei Rui wouldn't be so emotional. He would just kill him with a wave of his hand. The third-generation vampire, who was floating in the air and surrounded by bats, didn't understand what Ning Shu was saying. However, when he saw her smug expression and arrogant attitude, he knew that she wasn't saying anything good. There was a moment of confusion on the third-generation vampire's face. Had he been asleep for too long? Did the people of this world not worship and fear vampires anymore? Fei Rui gritted his teeth and conveyed Ning Shu's words to the third-generation vampire. The third-generation vampire frowned and stared at Ning Shu with his sharp eyes. Ning Shu was still smiling, but his body was tense. He was ready to fight back. She wanted to test the strength of the newly awakened third-generation vampire. After being injured, his strength must have decreased. Even if he had hibernated until now, his strength must not be as strong as when he was at his peak. The bats around the third-generation vampire chirped and swarmed towards Ning Shu. These bats looked very scary. They had scarlet eyes, which were bigger and more ferocious than ordinary bats. The black mass of Ning Shu rushed over. Dai Lin raised her staff and wanted to release a spell, but Ning Shu pulled her behind him. With a flick of his finger, a miniature fire dragon flew out from Ning Shu's hand and charged towards the bat. When the two met, the bats fell to the ground like hailstones. The bats were all burnt, and the air was filled with the smell of burnt meat. The third-generation vampire didn't even blink when his bat died. He didn't expect these bats to be able to deal with the Eastern sorcerers. Although they couldn't deal with him, they were enough to deal with ordinary people. The third-generation vampire raised his hand. His ruby ring shone faintly under the sunlight. It was so red that it gave people an ominous feeling. Although he didn't know what the third-generation vampire wanted to do, it was definitely not good for the blood hunters. The atmosphere was heavy. The third-generation vampire chanted a very complicated and difficult-to-understand sentence. Ning Shu was too lazy to let Fei Rui translate. Let him do whatever he wanted. A big fight was inevitable anyway. After the vampire chanted, a black mass appeared on the horizon. Because it was too far away, they couldn't tell what it was. When the black cloud came closer, they realized that it was actually countless bats. These bats rushed towards the blood hunters present. Dozens of bats were crouching on the human's body, biting the exposed skin. It was summer now, so everyone was wearing very cool clothes. Soon, they were bitten all over by the huge bats. These bats seemed to be poisonous. When bitten, the wounds would turn black. Dai Lin bit her lip and released white magic, turning the bats into ashes. Ning Shu's expression was cold. He quickly pinched his fingers and activated the manor's most powerful yang gathering formation. Then, he formed a huge talisman. This talisman turned into dense lines of rain. It fell on the countless bats like rain. When the bats came into contact with the talisman, they screeched in fear and turned into ashes. Ning Shu looked at the third-generation vampire and Fei Rui, who were floating in the air. Even if she couldn't kill the third-generation vampire, she had to get rid of Fei Rui. At least this way, the danger that Fei Rui posed to her would be resolved. Fei Rui might lose this time, but the next time they met, he would be stronger. Don't forget that Fei Rui had a lot of luck, and he was also a third-generation vampire. Maybe Fei Rui could reach new heights. Also, she had already offended Fei Rui. She had to get rid of him or there would be endless trouble. Ning Shu's gaze met the third-generation vampires. The third-generation vampire seemed to be observing Ning Shu and evaluating Ning Shu's strength. Then, he raised his hand and a round bead of blood appeared in his palm. The bead of blood flew towards Ning Shu at an extremely fast speed. Ning Shu rolled his eyes. Was he trying to contaminate him with blood? Sometimes, a vampire's blood was like a virus. It could turn a contaminated human into a monster that only knew how to suck blood. They would lose all will and thoughts. A huge fire dragon appeared behind Ning Shu's back. This fire dragon was covered in flames. The space around it was distorted by the heat. The fire dragon roared silently. It opened its mouth and swallowed the blood bead. The blood bead was evaporated by the high temperature. Everyone looked up at the fire dragon in the sky. Were they watching a sci-fi movie? And they were so hot. It was as if they were being roasted on fire. Many people's hair swelled and curled up. Some people's hair even started to burn. Ning Shu heaved a sigh of relief and touched her hair. His heart was filled with melancholy. This was the bad thing. The heat wave attacked indiscriminately. Ning Shu pointed at Fei Rui and the third-generation vampire. The fire dragon flew towards the two of them at lightning speed. Before the fire dragon got close, Fei Rui's skin started to tighten. His skin and flesh were about to explode. It was extremely uncomfortable. The fire dragon was an item of extreme yang while the vampire was an otherworldly item. Yin and yang complemented and restrained each other. The third-generation vampire's expression didn't change. He even started to fight the fire dragon. Ning Shu's main goal was to kill Fei Rui. He didn't want to fight with the third-generation vampire. The fire dragon roared and pierced through Fei Rui's body twice. Fei Rui's body seemed to be frozen. The skin on his face started to peel off. Chapter 1391. The muscles on Fei Rui's body began to fall off rapidly, revealing his white bones. His face had almost turned into a skeleton. His jaw and nose bones were exposed. His eyes were in his eye sockets. There were no muscles to support them. His eyeballs were about to fall out. The scene was quite horrifying. Ning Shu regretted knocking Mina out. If Mina saw Fei Rui like this, she wondered if she would still like him as much. It seemed that the fire dragon had caused a lot of damage to Fei Rui. Ning Shu was about to do it again when a ray of light shot out from the third-generation vampire's ruby ring and dissipated the fire dragon. Ning Shu was speechless. Fuck, it was annihilated. The energy was annihilated. The fire dragon was annihilated. The fire dragon's energy did not return to her body. It was too perverted to have such a thing. 2 drops of blood appeared between the third-generation vampire's eyebrows. Perhaps it had merged with Fei Rui's eyebrows. That was how Fei Rui's injuries were prevented. Ning Shu suspected that Fei Rui was the third-generation vampire's illegitimate son. Otherwise, why would he save him so many times? Vampires were cold and heartless. Even if they were of the same race, they were indifferent to each other. That was why Ning Shu and you suspected that Fei Rui was related to this third-generation vampire. The third-generation vampire stared at Ning Shu and said something that no one could understand. Fei Rui, who could have translated, was now seriously injured and looked like he was about to die. No one knew what he was saying. In order to show that he was very knowledgeable, Ning Shu pretended that he could understand what he was saying. He spread his hands and scolded, "You son of a bitch. You're so old that your teeth are falling out, yet you still come out to harm others. If I were you, I would have killed myself. If you can't even understand what I'm saying, what's the point of living?" When Ning Shu scolded him, his expression was very calm and serious. It was as if he was talking about something serious. Without Fei Rui's translation, the third-generation vampire did not know what Ning Shu was saying. He looked a little lost. Ning Shu laughed in his heart. "I'll make you feel at a loss." However, vampires could keenly sense good and evil. Therefore, even though Ning Shu was serious, the third-generation vampire directly shot a beam of light at Ning Shu. If they were hit by the light beam, they would be annihilated immediately. His body and soul were gone. What is this thing? Ning Shu quickly dodged the beam. He formed a hand seal and another huge fire dragon rose from his back. The fire dragon headed straight for Fei Rui, avoiding the third-generation vampire. The fire dragon pierced through Fei Rui's body once more, but it was immediately annihilated by the light beam. Ning Shu was a little scared. What the hell was this? However, he had managed to injure Fei Rui once again. At least he had gained something. Ning Shu's dantian had consumed a lot of energy, and the fire dragon's energy had not returned to his dantian. Instead, it was directly annihilated and disappeared without a trace. There wasn't much energy left in her dantian. If she continued to endure like this, she might end up in a passive state. Ning Shu felt uncomfortable all over. I might have absorbed some fake energy. Not only were vampires immortal, but they also had such a powerful tool. Fei Rui, who was once again ravaged by the fire dragon, collapsed completely. The third-generation vampire quickly took out 3 drops of blood and dripped it into Fei Rui's forehead. Since the appearance of the third-generation vampire, he had already used 6 drops of blood on Fei Rui. The blood of a third-generation vampire was extremely precious. He was definitely an illegitimate child. Ning Shu saw that the third-generation vampire's face was a little pale. He guessed that the blood consumption was too much for him to bear. Ning Shu steeled his heart and released the last bit of energy in his dantian. Fire dragons swarmed out one after another, flying towards Fei Rui and the third-generation vampire. He didn't believe that the third-generation vampire's ruby ring had an endless supply of energy. With so many fire dragons, there would definitely be some that slipped through the net. The third-generation vampire's ruby ring destroyed the fire dragons, and the other fire dragons pierced through Fei Rui's body once more. Fei Rui's body became more and more decayed, and gradually, he became a skeleton. The third-generation vampire didn't care about anything else. He grabbed Fei Rui's skeleton and teleported away. When Fei Rui and the third-generation vampire disappeared, Ning Shu immediately fell to the ground. He hurriedly fanned himself with his hand. Damn, it was too scary. However, these people had retreated temporarily. They thought that even if Fei Rui didn't die, he wouldn't be in a good condition. After all, he was already a skeleton, and his stomach was black. A lot of energy was needed to save Fei Rui. Where did such a large amount of energy come from? Or was it from the third-generation vampire? The death of countless elite vampires could intimidate the other vampires and calm them down temporarily. Ning Shu looked at the blood hunters on the ground. They had also suffered heavy losses this time. It was as if they had exchanged their lives for his. Ning Shu directly felt the huge difference between humans and vampires. Most of the blood hunters dealt with low-level vampires who killed indiscriminately and didn't follow the rules. They didn't come into contact with the elite vampires at all. It was easy for the vampires to fight 1 against 10. Ning Shu hammered his leg and said to the woman in the red dress, "Dai Lin, I said that on purpose. Mina is not that great." Dai Lin sat on the ground like Ning Shu and flicked her hair. "I know." The inspector investigated Mina's matter thoroughly. Mina's crime is unforgivable. She must die. Ning Shu didn't have any objections. Fei Rui couldn't even protect himself now. He might not even be able to survive. They definitely wouldn't come to save him again. Mina's situation wasn't optimistic. After the battle, Ning Shu's body was sore. He said to Dai Lin, "I'll go back first. Have a good rest. This time, it's all thanks to you. Otherwise, the blood hunters wouldn't have been able to escape." "How did you cultivate your Eastern spells?" Dai Lin asked. "You didn't show this before. Eastern sorcery is all about accumulation." Ning Shu said, "I learned this spell from an Eastern Taoist when I was on a mission. Because I know Eastern spells, does that mean I can't stay in the blood hunters anymore?" Ning Shu asked Dai Lin. Dai Lin shook her head. "As long as we can eliminate the vampires, it doesn't matter what method we use. Moreover, the third generation of vampires has awakened. We need more powerful humans." Ning Shu breathed a sigh of relief. He was afraid that Dai Lin would kick him out of the blood hunters because of the difference in their power system. Now that his dantian was empty, Ning Shu had to start cultivating again. Ning Shu opened the door and saw that Mina had woken up. She was struggling with all her might. When she saw Ning Shu, she immediately cried out. Ning Shu cast a spell and removed Mina's mute spell. "Molly, let go of me, let go of me." Mina cried out loudly. Chapter 1392. Mina's voice was very loud and sharp. She thought that she couldn't speak, so she used all her strength to scream. Mina didn't expect that she would suddenly be able to speak. Even she was shocked by her own voice. Mina was overjoyed. She could finally speak. Ning Shu walked in front of Mina, who was jumping around like a fish, and said with a smile, "You're awake." Mina stared at Mina. Suddenly, Mina spat at Ning Shu. Ning Shu leaned to the side and avoided Mina's spit. Ning Shu's expression was calm. He wasn't angry. Mina said to Ning Shu angrily, "Molly, I've never seen a woman as evil as you. Aren't you afraid of being struck by lightning?" Mina looked at Ning Shu. "You're deliberately trying to drive a wedge between Fei Rui and me. How can you be so evil?" "You're evil." Ning Shu nodded. "I'm evil. Come and bite me." "Oh right, let me show you something. Then you won't call me evil." Ning Shu took out his phone. There was a skeleton in the phone. A person was carrying the skeleton and flying away. "Take a look." Mina took a look at the photo on her phone and screamed in fright. She was frightened by the skeleton. Ning Shu was speechless. Ning Shu dug his ears. What was she screaming about? "You see this skeleton?" Ning Shu pointed at the skeleton. "Guess who this is?" Mina ignored Ning Shu and turned her head to the side. Ning Shu didn't mind. He smiled and said, "This is Fei Rui. I beat Fei Rui into a skeleton." Mina turned her head around abruptly, and her neck made a cracking sound as she turned around too quickly. Her neck was injured. Mina's expression was incredulous. Her neck was injured, so her expression froze. How did Fei Rui become like this? What ability do you have to deal with Fei Rui? Mina understood Fei Rui's strength too well. Fei Rui had easily solved any problem that was difficult for her. How could the powerful Fei Rui turn into a skeleton? Mina didn't believe it at all. Ning Shu put his phone away. "Believe it or not, it's up to you." Ning Shu untied Mina. "Since you don't believe me, you can ask the others." Mina's neck was injured, and just as she was about to turn her head, she screamed in pain and almost cried out. Mina tilted her head and ran out of the room. She wanted to ask the others if Fei Rui had really turned into a skeleton. Mina grabbed someone and asked if Fei Rui had turned into a skeleton. Right now, the vampire hunters were in a state of chaos. There were so many dead and injured. How could he have the time to think about Mina? Moreover, the moment Mina came up, she didn't even ask how her fellow vampire hunters were doing. Instead, he asked how the vampires were doing. It made people feel uncomfortable. Furthermore, this vampire had been lured here by Mina. Hence, Mina asked around, but no one paid any attention to her. Some people were so annoyed by her questions that they directly pushed her away. They said impatiently, "Yes, yes, that unlucky vampire has turned into a skeleton." Mina's behavior was extremely annoying. When Mina found out, she sat on the steps and buried her head in her hands, crying loudly. But soon, Mina was arrested by the inspectors. Mina's actions were undoubtedly betraying the organization. Saying that at the trial was just to make the organization look better. But it didn't mean that Mina was innocent. Mina was locked up again. When Ning Shu found out about Mina's situation, he calmed down and began to cultivate again. Ning Shu didn't remove the yang gathering formation in the manner. After all, he still needed to rely on the yang gathering formation to absorb the yang qi between heaven and earth. Ning Shu crazily absorbed the energy around him. The empty dantian began to slowly fill up. The lava-like energy surged in Ning Shu's energy center. Sure enough, as long as he had power, his heart would be at ease. Ning Shu was cultivating when there was a knock on the door. Ning Shu opened the door and saw that it was the blood hunter inspector. Ning Shu was a little puzzled. Why was the inspector looking for him? "Mina wants to see you. This is her last wish. After that, we will begin the execution," the inspector said coldly. Ning Shu shrugged indifferently. "I'm not going. You can carry out the execution directly. Out of humanitarian spirit, we will fulfill her last request, the inspector said. Ning Shu shrugged. With the degree of hatred Mina had for him, she would hate him to death. She would definitely have resentment. Resentment would affect the world. Maybe Mina would have a chance to counterattack. Ning Shu thought for a while and decided to watch Mina's execution. At the same time, he would destroy Mina's soul. Ning Shu followed the inspector to the confinement room, but there was a large round hole in the door. The inspector's face changed as he looked inside the hole. Sure enough, there was no one there. Where is she? The inspector was shocked. Ning Shu asked. How would I know? She is being watched by the people from your supervision department. Ning Shu spread his hands. Ning Shu's face was a little ugly. Mina had disappeared from the manor, and no one had noticed. What was going on? Could it be that she was rescued by someone? I have to report this matter. The inspector ignored Ning Shu. The traitor had escaped. This was a big deal. Ning Shu touched his chin and looked at the confinement room. There were no traces of damage. Mina was locked up inside. Someone had broken a hole in the door and taken Mina away. Ning Shu looked at the thick titanium alloy door. He didn't know what had cut it, and it was cut so round. Ning Shu immediately thought of the ruby ring of the third-generation vampire. Anything that was hit by the light beam emitted from the ruby ring would be annihilated. It was most likely the third-generation vampire who came to save Mina. TSK, TSK, TSK. Didn't they say that they were on par with God? But now they ran away for the couple. He had snuck in to rescue Mina. Did he still have the personality of a third-generation vampire? The 13 blood mansions that all blood breeds feared. What was the relationship between this third-generation vampire and Fei Rui? Why did they help him so much? One had to know that the third-generation vampire worked together to kill the second-generation vampire. It was impossible to say that the vampires were kind. Dai Lin hurried over. Seeing the hole in the door, she was speechless. Since she ran away, she is no longer a vampire hunter. Ning Shu said, then it's very likely that Mina will be embraced and become a vampire. Dai Lin sneered, so what if she becomes a vampire? I will still kill her. Ning Shu sighed in his heart. Life was not meant to end here. The plot still went as it should. Although there were some deviations in the details, Mina still escaped before the vampires. Ning Shu moved his neck. It seemed that the stronger she was, the better. Chapter 1393. The last time the vampires wreaked havoc in the manor, the vampire hunters had lost many blood hunters. Now that the vampire hunters were short of manpower, many newbies had started to take on missions. Even the leader of the vampire hunters, Dai Lin, had started to take on missions. If missions kept piling up, it would be a fatal blow to the reputation of the vampire hunters. Besides, time was life. If they were late, another life might be lost. Ning Shu had wanted to cultivate peacefully, but Dai Lin had given her a mission to take on newbies. She was to teach them and act as their bodyguard. Ning Shu had no choice but to follow these people to hunt vampires. Ning Shu had thought that after losing so many elite vampires, the vampires would know their place. But he didn't expect them to be so active and private, and many tragic things had happened. Moreover, the number of missing persons had suddenly increased. Now that the vampire hunters were in a precarious situation, Dai Lin had personally told her that it was impossible for her to ignore it. Moreover, Ning Shu had a premonition that the vampires wanted to start a second holy war and let the vampires become saints. The original owner had died early and was torn in half by Fei Rui. She didn't know what happened after that. Ning Shu felt more and more that the plot was incomplete. It was not complete at all. Basically, it only gave the original owner her life experience and the general background of the world. Stingy. Ning Shu carried the box out of the manor and saw two pairs of nervous partners. Obviously, they were nervous and excited for their first mission. This time, Tulu was with them. Ning Shu saw Tulu and greeted him, "I'll go with you this time. You have to make sure these four come back." Ning Shu put the box in the trunk and said to the four nervous partners, "Get in." Yes. The four obedient newbies quickly got in. Ning Shu sat in the front passenger seat and asked Tulu, who was driving, "Where's Casey? He was bitten by a bat and can't go on missions for a long time. I told him not to waste his energy on women, but he didn't listen. Now he's bitten like that." Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. "Look at how badly you've been bitten. Are you unable to have fun with women?" "That's not necessarily the case. It's the hand that's injured, and the hand is very important to a blood hunter." Ning Shu nodded. "That's right. It's not only important for blood hunters, but also for men." Tulu didn't know what to say, but he started the car and drove off. Ning Shu said to the four obedient children sitting behind him, "When you're doing a mission, you have to run if things go wrong. Especially when there's a huge disparity in strength between the two sides, don't fight force with force. If you're not the main character and don't have a golden finger to turn the tables, then don't take it head on." He was an unkillable cockroach. Even if his intestines were pierced through, he would still be alive and kicking. An ordinary person might just fall and die. People couldn't be compared to each other. "Tulu, good baby," Tulu coughed. "What Jasmine means is that we need to find the most effective way to do things. If retreating is also a strategy, then we need to retreat. Be subtle," Tulu whispered to Ning Shu. She was asking him to be a deserter. Ning Shu nodded. "You can talk to them." Ning Shu simply closed his eyes and began to cultivate. The fiery energy gathered around Ning Shu's body, and the people sitting in the car felt as if they were sitting in a steamer, extremely hot. Tulu, in particular, was sweating like he had just been fished out of water next to Ning Shu. Tulu had seen what Ning Shu was capable of, and he certainly knew that it was because of Ning Shu. Tulu nudged Ning Shu. "Take a break. It's so hot." Ning Shu, fine, was it really that hot? Her body must have gotten used to it. Ning Shu didn't absorb the yang energy in the world, but the meager spiritual energy. It shouldn't be too hot to absorb spiritual energy, right? However, Ning Shu was used to absorbing a lot of energy, and the tiniest bit of spiritual energy made Ning Shu feel like he was constipated. However, the people in the car were much more comfortable. Ning Shu gathered spiritual energy, and they felt indescribably comfortable. Ning Shu had been cultivating along the way, and he would occasionally open his eyes to eat. "What's our mission this time?" Dalin only asked her to follow the newcomers so that they wouldn't die on their first mission. It cost the organization a lot to train these people. It wasn't easy for an organization as large as theirs to make ends meet. Tulu tore into a piece of jerky and glanced at the four people. "Almost all the people in the town have gone missing. 7 or 8 people go missing every day. I'm afraid that we'll run into the same situation as last time. What are the vampires up to? I suspect that another third-generation vampire is about to awaken. A team was wiped out before, and their bodies are nowhere to be found. The undercurrents are surging. A great battle is inevitable. Our lives are in danger." Tulu sighed. Human lives are worthless in this chaotic world. The organization should cooperate with the government. This is a large-scale war, and vampire hunters alone won't be enough. Ning Shu bit into the jerky. "Your jerky tastes good. Where did you buy it?" Ning Shu chewed the jerky. The more she chewed, the more delicious it became. Tulu looked at Ning Shu helplessly. "Are we talking about jerky now? Then what do we do? Are we not going to eat it? We need to protect these eggs as much as we can. They'll be a part of the organization's strength in the future." Ning Shu said. Tulu handed Ning Shu a bottle of water. You have nothing to worry about with your strength. But for us, it's like ants in front of a flood. Not to mention ants, even humans would face the same situation when facing a flood. Ning Shu hammered his chest. I'm even more worried than you are. But what can we do? We have to work hard to become stronger. On the other side, the 4 obedient children came over to ask questions. They asked about some of the problems they would encounter during the mission. Tulu answered them patiently. Sometimes, he would even test them. Ning Shu propped up his chin and looked at the sky. He was thinking about Mina's current situation. Would he stay by Fei Rui's side like skeleton? Would he stay by Fei Rui's side? Perhaps the next time they met, her and Mina's identities would be blood hunters and vampires. He wondered if the misunderstanding between Fei Rui and Mina had been resolved. In any case, true love could conquer everything. Hopefully, before the misunderstanding was resolved, the two of them could have a passionate love affair. Hate you for torturing you, love you for enduring torment. Ning Shu felt his blood boil just thinking about it. But Fei Rui was only a skeleton right now. How could he have sex with Fei Rui? Even if Fei Rui had regrown his skin, he wouldn't be able to do it right away. Ning Shu felt his train of thought strayed. Why was he thinking about the two of them having sex? Chapter 1394. The group of 6 set off for the mission location. Last time, it was a remote town. This time, it was actually a bustling city. The vampires were already so arrogant, they even dared to do this in the city. It was so blatant. It completely violated the previous rule of the vampires to avoid the world. As humans gradually dominated the world, the vampires, especially Cain's grandson, fell into a deep sleep in order to survive. Coupled with the medieval church's purge of heretics, the number of vampires was greatly reduced. Generally, they wouldn't commit crimes in densely populated areas. Such a large-scale case of missing people. Ning Shu didn't need to think with his toes to think that it had something to do with the vampires. Ning Shu suspected that the vampires wanted to awaken the 3rd-generation vampires. He really couldn't figure out why the vampires would do such a thing. If the 3rd-generation vampires were to intervene in the affairs of the current generation of blood breeds, they would never let it go. For these ancient vampires, the descendants of the blood breeds were all puppets. One word from them could turn the blood breeds upside down. It could be said that the 3rd-generation vampires were actually taboo for the blood breeds. Why would they wake up now? Not only were humans suffering, but even vampires could be unlucky. Of course, there were vampires who madly worshipped the 3rd-generation vampires. The 6 of them found a hotel to stay in. Ning Shu stood by the window, holding his chin and thinking, where were the missing people taken to this time? Vampires slept in coffins. The last one was found in the church. What about this time? Could it be in a cemetery? Cemeteries were very suitable for creatures like vampires. Ning Shu took a piece of paper and folded it into a paper crane. He cut his finger and drew a talisman on the paper crane. He didn't succeed after several attempts. The wound had clotted, and Ning Shu had to squeeze the wound to squeeze the blood out. It was so torturous. The ground was littered with discarded paper cranes. Ning Shu was going crazy. He finally succeeded. Ning Shu placed the paper crane in his palm. The paper crane flapped its wings and flew out of the window. This talisman was very difficult. Ning Shu almost exhausted all the energy in his dantian to give a dead object the ability to fly. It required a huge amount of energy. Ning Shu immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and began cultivating. He set up a small yang congregating array. This paper crane could temporarily help to find people. As long as he knew the general direction, he could slowly search for it. Ning Shu absorbed the fire yang energy. Fortunately, it was summer, and the sun in the sky was also energy. Ning Shu felt that he had adapted to the heat. One day, he would be so awesome that he could embrace the sun. The next morning, the paper crane flew back and landed in Ning Shu's palm. Ning Shu put away the paper crane and said to Tulu and the 4 newbie eggs, "The missing people should be in the graveyard. There are so many graveyards. Who knows where it is?" Tulu asked. Ning Shu said, "We're definitely looking for the oldest and oldest tombs. I've already investigated it. I'll go now." They got into the car and headed to the cemetery in the city. Ning Shu followed the paper crane's information and arrived at a relatively remote cemetery in the city. There weren't many people around this place. One had to know that the West was more eccentric. There were people living in a cemetery nearby. Unlike the eerie ones in the East, the West's tombs were mysterious, romantic, and beautiful. It wouldn't be strange at all if they came to a cemetery while walking. This cemetery was desolate and gloomy. There was the sound of strange birds chirping on the branches. The leaves were lush, and there was no telling where the birds were. It was quite scary. Ning Shu stopped the car. "It should be here." Tulu took out a scanner. A light appeared on the screen. "It's really here." The 4 newbies were so nervous that they trembled. Their faces were flushed. "Now, take out your weapons," Tulu said to them. The 4 of them hurriedly took out different weapons. Some of them were holding silver swords, some were holding crossbows, and some were holding holy water. Tulu didn't say anything. He just stared at the scanner. Finally, they stopped in front of a grave. The grave would have looked very strange if it weren't for the shabby cross. It didn't look like a cemetery at all. Tulu whispered to Ning Shu, "It should be inside. There are no other vampires around here." Ning Shu nodded and formed a hand seal to set up a yang gathering formation. It would weaken the vampires who had just woken up. They didn't know if it was a vampire sleeping under the grave. If it wasn't, they would have dug the wrong grave. Ning Shu smiled at the 4 newbies. "Let's dig." It was their first time on a mission, so they did as they were told. Even if they had any objections, they couldn't say anything. He took out the shovel from the box and began to dig the grave. Ning Shu was making hand seals at the side. Tulu held silver arrowheads and a crossbow that was soaked in holy water. The 4 newbies dug a very deep grave. It took them a while to reach the coffin. There was also a nauseating smell of blood in the air. "I'll do it." Ning Shu took the shovel and wiped off the dirt on the coffin. Beneath the coffin was a stone slab, an extremely flat slab. Ning Shu pushed away the dirt and saw complicated patterns. It wasn't like the pentagrams from before. It was probably a 3rd-generation vampire. Also, the coffin was very glamorous, with roses carved on it. Ning Shu patted the dust off his hands and pushed the coffin open. The coffin was very heavy. Ning Shu could only push it open slowly. After moving the coffin away, Ning Shu covered her nose and looked into the coffin. A man was lying in the coffin. The man's hair was slicked back, and his hands were on his stomach. His skin was extremely pale, and there was a bright rose in the chest pocket of his glamorous suit. There was no telling what the rose was made of, but it didn't wither or wither. It was extremely bright, as if it had been poured with blood. The man suddenly opened his bloodshot eyes. Ning Shu said something that was hard to understand. "Ning Shu, fuck, I don't understand again." However, the vampire didn't care whether Ning Shu could understand or not. He reached out his hand and tried to suck Ning Shu's blood into the coffin. Ning Shu hurriedly dodged and made hand seals, using talismans to suppress him. The vampire in the coffin couldn't move, but the spell only lasted for a moment before it was broken. At yen% end. The vampire stared at Ning Shu with his bloodshot eyes. Being stared at by him like this, Ning Shu's body suddenly turned cold. It was as if an animal had met its natural enemy and was being targeted by something extremely dangerous. Ning Shu quickly made a hand seal, and a talisman immobilized the vampire. "Give me the silver sword!" Ning Shu shouted. Tulu was the first to react. He picked up the silver sword and tossed it to Ning Shu. Ning Shu bit his finger and drew a spell on the silver sword. When the spell was broken, Ning Shu stabbed the sword into the vampire's heart. Chapter 1395. The flames on the silver sword burned fiercely, and the face of the vampire who was stabbed in the heart was a bit hideous. Showing his sharp teeth, Ning Shu roared, and the surrounding wind started to blow. Ning Shu's face was wavy from the wind. The vampire's sharp claws grabbed Ning Shu's hand, but Ning Shu didn't let go. With the blood flowing out of his hand, Ning Shu drew a talisman on the vampire's body. When the blood came into contact with the vampire's face, it made sizzling sounds. The vampire roared fiercely. Ning Shu released a huge fire dragon. The fire dragon roared silently at the sky, and fiercely slammed into the coffin. With a loud bang, a huge wave of wind was created. Ning Shu felt bitter. Damn, the vampire's vitality was really tenacious. If it was any other vampire, the silver sword would be able to deal with it, but it was already like this. This vampire still wasn't dead. I might have used a fake silver sword. And her body was already covered in wounds from the vampire's claws. The fire dragon hit the vampire in the coffin again and again. The surrounding 5 people looked at Ning Shu, who was in the center of the hurricane, in fear. The huge impact made it impossible for them to do anything, and it was useless for them to go up. Tulu's face was ugly. These vampires were so powerful. If they all woke up, wouldn't the humans be finished? Ning Shu held the silver sword tightly with one hand, and drew a talisman with the other, and froze the vampire in place. Then he drew another talisman on the silver sword, and the flames on the silver sword became more vigorous. The vampire roared fiercely, and said something that Ning Shu couldn't understand. Ning Shu's face was cold. He pulled out the silver sword, and then heavily stabbed it into the vampire's heart. Under the fire dragon's powerful yang energy, the vampire gradually turned into nothingness. The roar was full of unwillingness and anger. The silver sword was nailed to the coffin, and there was a bright rose. The rose was still fresh and tender even after being roasted by the fire yang qi. Ning Shu put the roses into his bosom and pulled out the silver sword with all his might. However, he had used too much strength. The silver sword had been inserted into the coffin, and he could not pull it out now. Ning Shu was too lazy to pull it out. He said to the stunned people, "Give me a hand." Tulu pulled Ning Shu out of the hole. The other 4 ran to pull out the silver sword. Silver sword was so powerful, but it had killed such a powerful vampire. Who knew how much it would be worth in the future? Ning Shu sat on the ground. His hands and legs were trembling because he had used too much strength. It was soft and powerless. Fortunately, the vampires had just woken up. If they had waited any longer, they would not have been able to solve the problem. He was mentally exhausted. The 4 rookies worked together to pull out the silver sword, but no one dared to take it for themselves. Instead, they gave the silver sword to Ning Shu. Ning Shu handed it to Tulu. "I've drawn a charm on it. It's strong enough. Take it." Tulu did not refuse. "Thank you. If you need my help, I'll be sure to help." As soon as the matter was settled, a group of vampires arrived. Seeing that the grave had been dug up, and that the grave was empty, he immediately turned pale with fright. Ning Shu leaned against the tree. She was physically and mentally exhausted. She was too lazy to move now. These were all ordinary vampires. Tulu and the others could take care of them. The vampires were clamoring for them to hand over the person in the coffin. They fought without saying a word. Ning Shu drew a charm and destroyed some of the vampires. She then left the rest to Tulu and the others. The 4 rookies still needed training. The 4 newbies were flustered. The 4 of them couldn't even deal with one vampire. Ning Shu paid attention to the situation. If anything went wrong, she would intervene. Ning Shu rubbed her forehead. She was exhausted. Tulu was a seasoned veteran, and now he had a silver sword to draw talismans. Basically, he could stab a vampire in the heart, and then he would be finished off. It took a while for the vampires to be taken care of. The 4 rookies sat on the ground, their faces pale. Then, they threw up together. It was their first time killing a vampire, but they were still not used to it. After cremating the vampire's body, the 6 rookies returned to the hotel. Ning Shu took out the rose she had hidden in her room. She sniffed it. It smelled like roses. There was a dewdrop on the bud. It was like a flower that had just been picked in the morning. What was this? It looked like the vampire had been sleeping for a long time. The rose had not withered or rotted. It was amazing. It had to be a treasure. Ning Shu told 2333 to put it away. There was nothing wrong with collecting treasures. Ning Shu asked 2333, "Do you know what this is?" "No. There are billions of worlds. There are too many treasures. I can't know them all." 2333 said. Ning Shu did not say anything. Ever since he knew 2333 was a human, Ning Shu did not have much hope for 2333. He thought 2333 was an AI system. It must have a database. It should know everything. Ning Shu was more forgiving now that he knew it was a human. After all, humans were not perfect or omnipotent. They had flaws and weaknesses. Ning Shu told 2333 to put the rose in the system space. Ning Shu lay on the bed for a while. Then, he sat cross-legged on the bed and began to cultivate. Ning Shu was anxious. It seemed that the 3rd-generation vampires who were struck by God's flood were still alive. They were waking up one after another. If they woke up, the holy war would break out. Ning Shu was almost certain that the person he killed in the graveyard was a 3rd-generation vampire. If it was an ordinary vampire, it would not have been so powerful that it drained her of all her energy. Furthermore, they had the advantage of time and place, and had managed to kill the vampires with great difficulty. The West was a big place. He knew where the 3rd-generation vampires were hibernating. Not every vampire was so unlucky. He wasn't so lucky every time he encountered a 3rd-generation vampire when he was at his weakest. Ning Shu set up a yang gathering formation and began to cultivate through the night. He needed to become stronger. The next morning, Tulu came to tell Ning Shu that he needed to go back to the organization immediately. The organization was short of manpower. If it was before, he could go out and rest after completing a mission. But now, he had to go back. Especially this mission, he had to report it. Tulu was driving the car. He was speechless. What kind of luck do we have? This is the second time we've run into this. Ning Shu shrugged. I think all the vampire activity is because of the awakening of the 3rd-generation vampires. Ning Shu shrugged. If something happens, it's probably because of the awakening of the 3rd-generation vampires. Tulu sighed. A storm is coming. Everything was going well, but it's going to fall into chaos again. Chapter 1396. As soon as Ning Shu returned to the manor, someone called him to Dalin's room. Ning Shu carried his toolbox and went to find Dalin. Walking into the room, Ning Shu smelled a strong smell of blood and medicine. Ning Shu saw Dalin lying on the bed, one of her arms gone. Ning Shu hurriedly put down the toolbox and walked over to ask, "How did this happen?" Dalin's face was extremely pale and her lips were bloodless. Dalin said, "I was caught by a vampire." "Did a third-generation vampire wake up?" Ning Shu asked. Otherwise, with Dalin's strength, ordinary vampires couldn't do anything to her. She was a light magician. The organization's holy water was the magic she released. Except for the third-generation vampires, Ning Shu couldn't think of anyone who could hurt Dalin. Dalin hummed weakly. She had woken up and couldn't stop it. A holy war was inevitable. Use my name to send an email to the leaders of various countries. We still have to tell them about this matter and make preparations in advance, Dalin said. Ning Shu nodded. Seeing a computer on the table, he turned it on. Dalin spoke, and Ning Shu typed and sent the email. Ning Shu looked at Dalin's arm. Losing an arm had a great impact on her strength. Ning Shu held Dalin's hand, injected some spiritual energy into her body, and said, "Get well quickly. The vampire hunters need you." Dalin looked at Ning Shu and said, "Take care of the vampire hunters while I'm recuperating." Ning Shu hummed. Dalin closed her eyes to rest because of excessive blood loss. Ning Shu stared at the wrapped arm. The whole arm had been dislocated and separated from the body. In addition, in the situation at the time, there was no way to treat it in time. How painful it was to have her arm torn off like this. Although she was doing this for the sake of the vampire hunters, she was also doing this for the sake of humanity. There was no right or wrong, just survival. Vampires believed that their race was superior and should enslave humans like food. Just like how humans enslaved livestock. If humans wanted to survive, they could only resist. It was just that during the resistance, countless people had been sacrificed. It was all about survival. Ning Shu tucked Dai Lin in and went out with the computer and toolbox. After that, he announced that blood hunters should no longer take on missions alone. Since all the countries had received the news, they would definitely take measures to cooperate with each other. It was impossible to rely on vampire hunters. No matter how much money they paid the vampire hunters, if they couldn't stop them, they couldn't stop them. Ning Shu returned to his room and turned on his computer. There were a lot of emails. Someone had replied to the emails that had been sent out previously. Many people complained that they had given the vampire hunters so much money, yet they were still unable to solve such a small problem. I doubt that there is any need for an organization like yours to exist. Ning Shu was speechless. If you have the ability to fight vampires, then go catch vampires yourself. Why are you blabbering on and on here? Ning Shu replied with 4 words, "Believe it or not, it's up to you." Anyway, he had already said it. The lives of blood hunters were also lives. He couldn't use the lives of blood hunters to pay for it. The army had advanced weapons and had an advantage against vampires. Ning Shu took the opportunity to ask for some of the most recent advanced weapons. After much persuasion, he was finally given some. Blood hunters also had guns and ammunition, but against vampires, guns and ammunition were useless. They still had to rely on their attributes. Holy water was a spell that Dai Lin had released, which had the power to restrain vampires. Now that Dai Lin was injured, she couldn't release magic. Ning Shu thought for a moment and issued a document for all the blood hunters to turn in their silver swords. She drew a charm. Silver could originally restrain vampires, but if a charm was added to it. Under the enhancement of the power of the sun, the charm's lethality was even stronger. Soon, the people below collected all the silver swords. And it was done very quickly. Ning Shu really didn't expect it to be so fast. So cooperative. Ning Shu went to the Manners restaurant for dinner and met Tulu and Casey. Casey's arm was wrapped in gauze and hung in front of his chest. "Everyone hopes to have a silver sword like me. When those 4 new recruits came back, they spread the news about you like it was a miracle. Tulu said to Ning Shu with a smile. Ning Shu, he had thought that the Blood Hunter organization was very efficient, but it turned out to be this. After eating 4 super big burgers and drinking a glass of milk, Ning Shu was ready to go back and draw talismans. Pushing the door open, he saw the silver swords piled up half the room. He really brought this on himself. Ning Shu took out a silver bowl, cut his hand, and squeezed blood into the bowl. Her blood contained the power of the sun, which was the last thing he could use to draw talismans. However, his body was full of yang energy. Ning Shu was really afraid that his chest would become chest muscles, and he would grow a beard. Blood dripped into the silver bowl, billowing smoke. Ning Shu, was her blood sulfuric acid? He was on the verge of bursting into flames. Ning Shu grimaced and squeezed out half a bowl of blood. Then, Ning Shu picked up the silver sword on the ground, dipped it in blood, and mobilized the energy in his body to draw talismans. Ning Shu worked day and night. After staying up for a few nights, she finally finished drawing all the silver swords. At this moment, Ning Shu had dark circles under his eyes, his hair was curly, and his face was pale. After finishing, he felt so weak, very weak. Ning Shu made a call and asked someone to move these things away. During this period, she had bled several times. She thought that half a bowl would be enough, but it turned out that it wasn't. The person in charge who received the call immediately came. When he saw Ning Shu, he greeted him and then immediately asked someone to move the things away. He said to Ning Shu, "Thank you." Ning Shu was expressionless. "Thank you." After finishing her work, Ning Shu ate a bowl of pig blood noodles and fell into a deep sleep. She was going to die. Ning Shu slept soundly in the house. The blood hunters who received the silver swords with talismans drawn by Ning Shu carried the silver swords on their backs every day. They didn't let go even when they were eating or sleeping. It was as if having this thing gave them a sense of security. Ning Shu slept for a day and a night. When she woke up, she hurriedly sat cross-legged and began to cultivate. Wasting time was wasting life. Even if Ning Shu didn't go out, someone would deliver food to the door. And every time, it was 5 super big burgers and a big bottle of yogurt. Ning Shu didn't stand on ceremony and ate it all, so that she didn't have to go to the restaurant. Either Tulu or Casey knew that she ate so much. While eating, Ning Shu activated the GPS system to check where Fei Rui and Mina were. These 2 people were always a thorn in Ning Shu's heart. Ning Shu turned on the GPS system, but it couldn't be used. He had to pay 5 merit points. Ning Shu was so angry that she almost stomped on the super burger. What the hell? 5 merit points for locating? It didn't cost merit points before. What do you mean, what do you mean? Ning Shu roared. Chapter 1397. It was true that the sky had changed after one night of sleep. Since when did the GPS require merit points? Bullshit. 2333 said, the GPS has restrictions. You've already used up all the free uses. If you use it again, you'll have to pay merit points. Ning Shu, why not power of faith? The GPS can locate people. How can such a heaven-defying skill be used for free? It's the same with merit points or power of faith. Bullshit, Ning Shu felt like she had lived for a long time. Do I have to spend 5 merit points to locate them? 2333 asked. There's no point in being angry. The mainframe system is such a bullshit. Ning Shu felt like she was very strong. She said firmly, no. Spending 5 merit points to locate Fei Rui and Mina, she was the one who had overestimated herself. They would definitely meet. After all, Fei Rui and Mina were both taken advantage of by her. They would definitely get back at her. Plus, their identities were on opposite sides. There would be many opportunities for them to meet in the future. Ning Shu also suspected that Fei Rui wasn't dead. Don't ask why. Intuition. And according to the law of protagonists, how could Fei Rui die? Maybe a drop of blood could bring him back to life. Ning Shu was full of resentment as she gnawed on her burger. Back then, she had spent 5 merit points to install the GPS. Now, she had to spend merit points. Merit points. She might not get 5 merit points in a world, but a GPS location cost 5 merit points. Why didn't she go to heaven? If it was 5 merit points, Ning Shu wouldn't even blink. After eating her burger, Ning Shu continued to cultivate. She had eaten so much, but all the energy was absorbed by her dantian. Ning Shu looked at the lava-like energy in her dantian. There was a fire dragon swimming inside. Ning Shu was very satisfied. She was getting more and more motivated. She sat cross-legged and continued to cultivate. This world was too dangerous. Plus, Dai Lin was injured. She had to take care of the vampire hunters for now. She couldn't let anything happen to the vampire hunters. At least the original owner had a safe place to live. Even if there wasn't a place where one could live peacefully, as long as one had great strength, anywhere would be a place where one could live peacefully. Ning Shu was in the middle of cultivating when an urgent alarm sounded in the manor. Ning Shu quickly stopped cultivating and went to the square. There were many people in the square. The blood hunters were all looking at the vampires warily. Ning Shu looked at the group of vampires who were dressed as if they were attending a funeral. They were too arrogant to barge into the manor in broad daylight. Ning Shu looked at the leader of the vampires. He was wearing a gorgeous suit, and beside him stood a delicate girl. Seeing these two people, Ning Shu's pupils shrank. Fuck, isn't this Fei Rui and Mina? Fei Rui wasn't just a skeleton anymore. He was as good as new. Ning Shu wanted to kneel down and ask what the method was and how it was done. Mina's face was a little pale. Under the sunlight, she frowned and seemed a little uncomfortable. She was holding a lace umbrella. Based on these observations, Ning Shu was sure that Mina had been embraced. Why didn't he see the scene of these two loving and killing each other? Sure enough, true love could overcome everything. Ning Shu straightened his chest and slowly walked over. When the blood hunters saw Ning Shu, they all breathed a sigh of relief and made way for Ning Shu. Molly, you're here, Casey said to Ning Shu, who was standing in front of the blood hunters. Mina might have been embraced. Ning Shu nodded. They stood opposite a group of vampires. With Ning Shu standing in front of them, the blood hunters present seemed to have a lot more confidence. Ning Shu said to Tulu, "Go tell Dalan not to come over. I can handle this." Tulu nodded and immediately left. Mina, who was wearing beautiful gloves and holding an umbrella, stared at Ning Shu. She stared straight at Ning Shu. Seeing Ning Shu's status among the blood hunters, she felt indignant and mocked, "Molly, I didn't expect you to be so impressive. Do the others know who you are? Stepping on other people's shoulders to climb up, despicable and shameless." Ning Shu picked his ear. "Whose shoulder did I step on? Didn't you just step on your partner's shoulder and betray him?" Mina said angrily. Ning Shu's expression was indifferent. He spread his hands and said, "You've already done it and you won't let me talk about it. So what if I reported you? Your small shoulders can't support my feet at all. Stepping on your shoulders to climb up, you think too highly of yourself." Fei Rui sneered. "You're still so annoying, sharp-tongued and ugly." Ning Shu spread his hands. "Fine, fine. You're the only one who's beautiful. Even your asshole has double eyelids." Fei Rui's face twisted in anger. He pointed at Ning Shu. You. He couldn't form a complete sentence for a long time. The blood hunters all sneered and chuckled. "Vulgar and disgusting," Mina said with disdain. "My words are just a little disgusting, but not as disgusting as your actions." You betrayed the organization, yet you still act like you're innocent and wronged, yet you still want to kill me. That's disgusting. Now that you're a vampire who can't see the light of day, you think the identity of a vampire suits you. Sleeping in a coffin and hiding in a dark corner. You want to raise morale by arguing? Bring it on. Mina looked at Ning Shu with disdain. Her gaze was like that of a frog at the bottom of a well. Do you know how many humans want to become vampires? Do you know that they serve vampires for immortality and wealth? The blood hunters protect humans, but humans want to become vampires. Ning Shu smiled, revealing his white teeth. Although I don't want to make myself sound so great, the purpose of our existence is to protect those ignorant humans who don't know the truth. To prevent them from being killed by vampires without knowing it. We protect these people, not those humans who worship vampires. With the awakening of the third generation of vampires, many people have died in ignorance. Vampires extract great power from blood. It's not that this world doesn't have evil and dark clouds, but that there are people blocking them. To be able to live in peace and stability, it depends on the dedication of some people. Country, soldiers, Ning Shu straightened his chest. I'm proud of being a blood hunter. I'm proud of protecting humans. I'm proud of living a happy life. The blood hunters behind Ning Shu also straightened their chests like Ning Shu. Mina's face turned ugly. She said with disdain, no matter how nice your words sound, you're still a despicable and shameless person. You're trying to drive a wedge between us. Ning Shu said indifferently, in my opinion, you're a selfish and heartless person. That's enough. Don't waste your breath. Today, we'll eliminate the blood hunters. Fei Rui pushed Mina behind him. His bloodshot eyes stared sharply at Ning Shu. Chapter 1398. Fei Rui looked at Ning Shu with eyes full of disgust. Ning Shu had crippled Fei Rui previously, and the only reason Fei Rui was able to recover was because of his strong willpower. With the help of a third-generation vampire, Fei Rui was able to recover to his peak condition. Moreover, Fei Rui had profited from his misfortune and become much stronger. Fei Rui immediately brought a large group of people to take revenge and wash away the humiliation. Fei Rui had been beaten to such a state in front of so many people last time, and he had been reduced to a skeleton. This was even more embarrassing than taking off his clothes in front of everyone. In addition, Fei Rui had been scolded by Ning Shu previously, so he was even more furious. He was about to take action. Mina looked at Ning Shu. You're really a frog at the bottom of a well. The strength of the blood breeds is not something you can imagine. Mina had only understood the strength of the blood breeds during her time in the blood breeds. When she was a vampire hunter, her understanding of the blood breeds was only the tip of the iceberg. A true vampire was much stronger than what they appeared to be. Ning Shu said indifferently, I've never doubted the strength of the blood breeds, but what does their strength have to do with me? You barged into the manor in broad daylight. Didn't you just come back to show off and show off? Mina, you're already a sinner of the vampire hunters. Now that you've become a vampire, your crime is clear. Do you think the blood breeds will tolerate you just because you betrayed the organization that raised you? Today, you fell in love with a vampire, so you betrayed the vampire hunters. If you fall in love with a human one day, will you disregard the rules of the vampire hunters again? Oh, I forgot. You've always been such a willful person. Ning Shu's mouth was like a machine gun, talking non-stop. Mina looked at Fei Rui carefully and said to Ning Shu angrily, Molly, don't try to drive a wedge between us. The person I like is Fei Rui. It's always been Fei Rui. Ning Shu did not believe her. You'll only love Fei Rui for your entire life. Ning Shu waved his hand. Don't joke around. Do you dare to swear that you'll only love Fei Rui for the rest of your life? That you'll never get tired of him? You vampires have a long, long life. You have to look at the same face every day and spend a long, long time with each other, and there's no end to it. TSK, just thinking about it makes me feel despair. New clothes look good and beautiful, but people don't like old clothes when they're old. Endless days, with one person, all love will be worn away by the passing of time. Come, tell me loudly. Shout to the sky that you'll always love Fei Rui. You'll never tire. You'll make Fei Rui smile so adorably every day. Ning Shu lifted her chin at Mina. Swear, you two are truly in love. Mina's mouth fell open. Fei Rui's face was extremely ugly. His face was already pale, but now it was ashen. His eyes were so red that they were dripping blood. What's the point of talking to her? Just kill her. Fei Rui waved his hand at the vampires behind him. Perhaps he was wary of Ning Shu's talisman, but the arrogant Ning Shu said, "Let's fight." He then turned to Mina and said, "Stand aside." Fei Rui, be careful, Mina said to Fei Rui with concern, but in her heart, she felt that Ning Shu was no match for Fei Rui. Mina did not have a direct understanding of Ning Shu's strength, even though Fei Rui had once said that Ning Shu was strong. But Mina's impression of Ning Shu was that of an ordinary blood hunter. He was just a little better than her at hunting. How could he be considered strong? In the previous battle, Mina had been knocked unconscious by Ning Shu and tied up. Mina still hoped that Fei Rui would avenge her. Molly had mocked her time and time again, teasing her. Molly had betrayed her, sowed discord between her and Fei Rui, and stepped on her shoulders to get to where she was today. What a shameless bitch. Fei Rui's expression was somewhat dignified. Even though he was much stronger than Jiqiang, he still did not dare to relax. Even if he could not deal with this woman today, he had to kill all the blood hunters, so that there would be no blood hunters left. The blood hunter organization would become history. The vampires brought by Fei Rui attacked the ordinary blood hunters. Sharp nails grew out of their fingers, and they were as hard as iron. The blood hunters raised their silver swords, not to be outdone, and met the vampires head-on. As long as the silver swords hit the vampires, they would be injured, causing the vampires' bodies to sizzle and emit white smoke. It would also cause the vampires great pain. Ning Shu watched with a smile. Sure enough, the strength of the buff was not as simple as 1 + 1. Instead, it increased exponentially. Fei Rui frowned as he saw the elite vampires he brought being injured by ordinary humans. Would the result be the same this time? Fei Rui's mouth twitched as he raised his hand. On his finger, there was a ruby ring. The ruby ring shot out a beam of light towards a blood hunter. The blood hunter that was hit by the light was immediately extinguished, and even the silver swords in his hands disappeared. This time, it was Ning Shu's turn to be ugly. Ning Shu cast a spell and formed a huge talisman. When Fei Rui saw the talisman, he immediately used the ruby beam to illuminate it. Because the talisman was powerful, it was not extinguished immediately. However, its energy was getting thinner and thinner. In the end, it was still extinguished. Fearing that Ning Shu would use another spell from the east, Fei Rui did not use the ruby ring to aim at the other blood hunters. Ning Shu and Fei Rui maintained a strange peace as they watched the battle between the vampires and the blood hunters. Ning Shu stared at the ring on Fei Rui's finger. Didn't this ring belong to the third-generation vampire? How did it end up in Fei Rui's hands? Could it be that the third-generation vampire lent it to him? Wasn't he afraid of not returning such a good item? Ning Shu rubbed his chin. Could it be that Fei Rui was the illegitimate son of that vampire? Ning Shu's eyes darted around. His gaze swept across Mina and Fei Rui's bodies, and a strange thought appeared in his mind. That was, Fei Rui had killed the third-generation vampire. Otherwise, how could Fei Rui recover so well? The blood of a third-generation vampire contained boundless energy. It could be described as God's blood. Previously, when Fei Rui was injured, it was the third-generation vampire who used his blood to keep him alive. Ning Shu suspected that Fei Rui had sucked all of the third-generation vampire's blood, which was why he could recover in such a short period of time. Moreover, his aura was much stronger than before. Other than this explanation, Ning Shu could not think of any other explanation. Ning Shu felt that he might have guessed the truth. In fact, Fei Rui and Mina were the same type of people. They were both selfish people. On the surface, the two's great love touched the world. However, other than themselves and the other party, they would not care about anything else. They would never think that they were wrong. Chapter 1399. Ning Shu's guess was basically the truth, but something complicated happened during this period of time. Under Fei Rui's pleas, the third-generation vampire secretly went to the Blood Hunters and rescued Mina, bringing her to the Blood Clan. When Mina was brought to the Blood Clan, she saw Fei Rui sleeping in a coffin. He was just a skeleton, and she cried her eyes out. Mina was not liked by women, but she was definitely liked by men. After a period of time, the third-generation vampire knelt before Mina's charm. So the third-generation vampire also fell in love with Mina. He confessed to Mina beside Fei Rui's coffin. Mina looked confused and innocent, and blabbered that the person she liked was Fei Rui. The third-generation vampire said that Fei Rui's injuries were too serious, and whether he could survive was a problem. The third-generation vampire wanted to give Mina the embrace. The person who was embraced by the third-generation vampire had a very high status. They were even nobler than some of the current princes and lords. But who was Mina? She was mighty and mighty. The one I love is Fei Rui. Fei Rui, who was lying in the coffin, was furious. You actually want my woman? Although I let you save her, it doesn't mean you can do that. So, Fei Rui caught the third-generation vampire by surprise and bit his neck. Gulp, 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 drink the blood of third-generation vampires. Don't ask why the third-generation vampire was so weak. In front of the protagonist, even a god would kneel down. Plus, Fei Rui was injured now. He had to find a suitable reason for Fei Rui to suck the third-generation vampire's blood. The third-generation vampire wanted to take advantage of him when he was seriously injured to cheat on him. No man could tolerate this kind of thing. Fei Rui directly sucked the third-generation vampire's blood dry, obtained the blood's power, and repaired his body. He snatched the ring of the third-generation vampire and annihilated the third-generation vampire. Not even a trace of him was left. After Fei Rui recovered, the first thing he did was to embrace Mina. He wanted Mina to become his prey and belong to him alone. Mina pitifully explained to Fei Rui what had happened. Fei Rui had forgiven Mina, but no one knew what he was thinking. Then, Fei Rui brought a bunch of vampires to take revenge. Fei Rui raised his hand towards Ning Shu, and Ning Shu shot out a beam of light from his ring. Ning Shu quickly dodged. His body and soul would be destroyed. It was too terrifying. He didn't know what it was. With Fei Rui's trump card, Ning Shu could only form hand seals to defend himself. However, the talisman couldn't last for long. Moreover, it would exhaust all of the energy in his body. If he really exhausted all of his energy, he would be like a fish on a chopping board. However, Fei Rui's ring made it impossible for Ning Shu to get close to Fei Rui. It directly annihilated the person, turning him into something the size of a molecule. Even his soul no longer existed. He was deader than dead. That was too much. Mina was a little surprised that Ning Shu could form such a powerful talisman. However, after seeing Ning Shu being beaten up by Fei Rui, she couldn't help but be shocked. Fei Rui, on the other hand, was as still as a mountain, forcing her into such a sorry state. He only knew how to talk nonsense. He didn't have any skills. Mina couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh with a look of disdain. She thought that he was strong. Ning Shu ignored Mina's disdain and laughed all she wanted. It would be best if she laughed until her teeth fell out. Damn, if he didn't have this ring, Ning Shu would definitely fight it out with Fei Rui. Ning Shu didn't dare to take the risk and use his body to defend against the ruby. So what if you have equipment? Although I don't have, wait, Ning Shu suddenly remembered that he had picked up a rose. That rose was very fresh. Ning Shu dodged the beam of light from the ruby ring and said to 2333, hurry up and give me the rose. A rose appeared in Ning Shu's hand behind his back. Ning Shu clenched her fist and took out the roses. He didn't know what this rose could do, but it had to be a treasure to be able to stay so fresh for so long. Moreover, this rose belonged to the blood breeds. It might be able to counter Fei Rui's ring. He wanted to treat a dead horse as if it were still alive. Mina saw Ning Shu take out a rose and couldn't help but laugh. Molly, why are you taking this out? Did some man give it to you? Who would like a woman like you? Ning Shu glanced at Mina. You just have a man who likes you. What's there to be proud of? Other than being liked by men, what else do you have? You have a lot of things, but you don't even have a man's love. How sad. If no man loves you, no one will love you. Ning Shu smiled and put the rose on the tip of her nose to smell it. I don't care if others love me or not. Can I force them to love me? Besides, I can do whatever I want. Why do I need others to love me? Ning Shu had always felt that it was strange. Why did not being loved become a weakness for others to attack? Why did it become an extremely sad existence? You're loved, but I don't see you being so awesome. The value of your existence is to make others like you. The value of my existence is to make those who hate me feel helpless. I like it when you hate me, but you can't do anything to me. You're so sharp-tongued. I hate you so much, Mina said hatefully. Ning Shu smiled. He liked Mina's current attitude very much. If you have the ability, come and hit me. Come on. If you don't have the ability to talk, then you can't win an argument. Mina looked down on Ning Shu and took out a rose. Fei Rui's expression was a little hesitant as he stared at the rose in Ning Shu's hand. It's from the Torito clan. Fei Rui stared at the rose, unable to move his eyes away. There were 13 blood clans, and each clan had a different emblem. The Torito clan's emblem was a rose, and they were called the Rose Clan. They were the most beautiful people in the blood clan, and they were gentlemen who sought beauty the most. But that was not important. What was important was that this rose was a treasure. Hand it over. It's from the blood clan. Fei Rui stretched out his hand. Ning Shu was speechless. I'll give it to you just because you said so. Ning Shu rolled his eyes. Who said it's from the blood clan? It's in my hands now, so it's mine. What proof do you have that it's yours? Be a little shameless. Ning Shu did not expect Fei Rui to be so shameless as to ask for it. He was speechless. Fei Rui's face was cold. This belongs to the blood clan. It should be returned to the blood clan. Otherwise, I won't rest until I'm dead. Ning Shu waved the rose. Then I won't rest until I'm dead. Shameless thing, everything is yours. Chapter 1400. Fei Rui's red eyes stared at the rose in Ning Shu's hand. The roses looked even more vibrant under the sunlight, and the dew on the roses shone brightly. It was very beautiful. Even Mina fell in love with the rose. The more she looked at it, the more she liked it. It was different from normal roses. It seemed to have a magical quality. Even Jasmine, who was holding the rose, looked much prettier. It was very charming. Mina bit her lip and said to Fei Rui, "This rose is so beautiful. Girls all liked beautiful things, especially those in fresh flowers. Fei Rui said, "This belongs to the blood race." Ning Shu saw Fei Rui staring at her roses, his eyes filled with desire. It seemed that this was something good. Even Fei Rui wanted it so shamelessly. Ning Shu breathed in the rose's fragrance exaggeratedly. "It smells so good." Fei Rui frowned and raised his hand. Ning Shu shot out a ray of annihilation light. Ning Shu immediately dodged. Fei Rui heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Ning Shu didn't know how to use the rose. Ning Shu had been observing Fei Rui's expression the whole time. Could it be that this rose countered the one in Fei Rui's hand? Ning Shu held the rose and channeled the qi in his energy center into the rose. The rose didn't react. Was it useless? Or did she not know how to use it? But looking at Fei Rui's expression, it should be something good. Otherwise, how could vampires, with their noble and arrogant personalities, be so shameless as to ask a lowly human for something? Ning Shu channeled more qi into the rose. However, the color of the rose turned dark. It even started to rot. Ning Shu was speechless. What was going on? Ning Shu was dumbfounded. A drop of dark red blood slowly dripped out of the rose. The blood left the rose and the rose returned to its original color. It was full of vitality. What was this blood? Was it the blood of the previous owner of the rose? The vampire in the coffin? The drop of blood wanted to return to the rose, but it was evaporated by Ning Shu's fire dragon. Ning Shu held the rose and felt that this rose was even more beautiful than before. It was full of vitality. Fei Rui's face contorted in anger as he shot several annihilation rays at Ning Shu. However, this annihilation beam disappeared before it even touched Ning Shu. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows in surprise. What was going on? Ning Shu looked at the rose in her hand and smiled. Although she didn't know what was going on, it was definitely related to the rose in her hand. The roses were actually able to resist the light of annihilation. In that case, Fei Rui's ring wouldn't have any advantage. Ning Shu smelled the fragrance of the roses and said while standing on tiptoe, "Come on. This belongs to the blood clan. Hand it over." Fei Rui stared at Ning Shu. "One last thing. Hand over the blood race's things. Otherwise, the blood race will invade. There will be no place for you blood hunters." Ning Shu put the rose in her ear and said, "You're talking as if you're here as guests. Aren't you going to kill us now?" Ning Shu sneered and looked at Fei Rui and Mina. Then, he glanced at the blood hunters and vampires who were fighting fiercely. "This is already the second time. No more than 3 times. This time, all of you will stay here. Do you really think that blood hunters are a place where you can come and go as you please?" A huge fire dragon appeared behind Ning Shu. It roared towards the sky and rushed towards Fei Rui. Wherever the fire dragon went, the vampires who were hit by its sparks were burned to ashes. Fei Rui's pupils trembled. This fire dragon was even bigger than the last time. Fei Rui quickly shot an annihilation ray at the fire dragon. Ning Shu injected some energy into the rose and the rose released an invisible barrier that dealt with the annihilation ray. The fire dragon rushed towards Fei Rui. Fei Rui's fingers grew sharp and he opened his mouth to reveal his fangs. With a roar, he cut the fire dragon in half. The fire dragon was just a body of energy. Even if it was cut in half, it wouldn't affect it much. Fei Rui's hand, on the other hand, had been charred black and was smoking. The fire dragon was the power of the sun and was specially used to counter vampires. Fei Rui would definitely be at a disadvantage if he fought it head-on. Fei Rui cut his skin and a drop of blood floated in the air and landed on the fire dragon. The fire dragon's body immediately sizzled, as if water had been poured on a burning piece of wood. It made sizzling sounds and smoke rose from it. Ning Shu didn't care. "Let's play slowly." After all, the fire dragon's energy was gone. She could condense it again. Mina watched the battle in fear. She couldn't help but look at Ning Shu with shock in her eyes. How did Jasmine become so powerful? Was this still the Jasmine she knew? Had Jasmine been hiding her strength all this time? And she had hidden it so deeply. How scheming. In the past, she pretended that she wasn't very powerful and then waited to amaze everyone. How despicable. Mina looked at Ning Shu, who was leisurely playing with the roses, and felt as if there were countless ants gnawing at her heart. Ning Shu turned his head and met Mina's eyes. He smiled at her. Mina saw the smile on Ning Shu's face and couldn't help but shudder and retreat. She wanted to find a safe place, but she found that there was nowhere safe. The sun in the sky made her feel uncomfortable. In the past, she didn't think much of the sun. But after becoming a vampire, she couldn't even see the sun. Blood hunters and vampires were fighting all around her. If she wasn't careful, she would be affected. Only by Fei Rui's side would she be safe. But now, Fei Rui was fighting with the fire dragon and his hand was burned. Mina felt very insecure. Ning Shu formed a seal and cast a body-securing talisman, locking Mina in place. Mina was suddenly immobilized and couldn't move. She was horrified. What's going on? Mina reflexively looked at Ning Shu. Last time, she couldn't speak. This time, she couldn't move. It must be Jasmine's doing. Mina wanted to call for help from Fei Rui, but Ning Shu immediately cast a silence talisman on her. Mina opened her mouth, but she couldn't say a word. She was so anxious that tears fell. She glared at Ning Shu with hatred. This woman was too hateful. She kept teasing her. Facing Mina's gaze, Ning Shu felt very happy. This hatred was because Mina was too weak. That was why she could be teased by him. Fei Rui, who liked her, couldn't even protect himself. So what if someone liked him? If he relied on others, he could only be caught in the dark. Ning Shu floated in the air with a gorgeous rose clipped to her ear. Her fingers fluttered, and between the afterimages of her fingers, a huge talisman appeared. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.